I'd like to call the school committee meeting to order. Tonight we are having our interviews for the position of school superintendent. We have 3 interviews we are conducting this evening, and then we will have 3 further interviews on Monday. It was canceled because of last night's weather. But I feel like we have a strong group of candidates today. And Mr. Yanofsky, it's great to have you here. Welcome. I'm Mayor Edward Bettencourt, school committee. I'm the chair of the school committee. You've had the opportunity to meet our school committee members. Myself and the school committee will be asking you a number of questions this evening, and it's great to have you here. Your resume speaks well of you. Before we get into some of the questions, I thought I would afford you the opportunity if you wanted to make a 2 to 3 minute opening statement about what has brought you here today.
And I can be heard okay? This is good? Okay. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. This is the right time for me and the right place in terms of why I want to be superintendent in Peabody. I have 2 children. One's going into college. One's in college. One's going to be a senior, and I can sink myself really into a community. As a principal, I loved being deeply enmeshed in my school community, but obviously a district's much more significant, and this is exactly the kind of place, and Peabody's the place I want to be for a long time. What I believe is that it has a combination of the right size. I've been in districts where you have trouble getting close enough to the action to see what really works, to really interact with teachers and administrators to see what's going well. When I was in Boston, things could be eliminated because some bureaucrat multiple layers up decided that that was a program that had to go, even though it really worked. And I want to be in a community that's small enough where you really can develop relationships with the community, with the staff, and develop a team of the central office that works extremely closely with its staff and effectively. It's also a community that has great traditions and really believes in serving all of its children and all of their diversity, and one that, because of that, is excited about growing, is excited about bringing in innovative teaching approaches, but also has a firm belief and its feet on the ground in terms of what has worked. So those 2 things together make it both the diversity and the size and just the traditions around the community make me very excited about being here.
Thank you, Mr. Yanofsky. I'll ask the first question because it's something that we're going to be dealing with very shortly as a committee. We've already started the process, but can you talk a little bit about your budget experience and how you've worked on different budgets over the course of your career, and what type of approach do you take when dealing with budgets?
My approach is to set up structures where things are extremely transparent and where they flow from a shared vision for what we're trying to accomplish both in the short term and the long term. So what that means is that you need to develop you need to use technology so that things are articulated by line item. A school committee should have the ability to know exactly how things are being spent and be able to give really clear oversight to that. So articulating that clearly. The process for developing a budget needs to flow from this building of this shared vision that you develop with school committee, the community, and teachers and administrators and your central administrative staff, so that you identify priorities through really reaching out through a variety of different communication tools, and you bring in what are the priorities and you develop clear sense of what those priorities are, and then you can go about identifying what is really important for your budget. You make a list of those things and you knock off those things in tough fiscal times that are less important, and you hold on to what's more important. My experience with budgets have been, in Boston, the budget is extremely decentralized so that principals have tremendous control over the budget, and it's about being transparent and building a shared vision so that I would identify sort of what what was most important to our school, and that might involve the arts, where it was at at my school in Boston, we wanted to protect the arts, and so we would have to structure things around that. What needs to go into having a solid arts program, and if that was the high on the list of priorities, how should that affect the listing of our budget priorities and things that might need to be removed because of difficult financial times. Same is true in Gloucester, where I've been assistant superintendent, where every year we have very limited discretionary income. Our budget goes up by 2.5% to 2.75% each year, and you have inflation that goes up often faster than that. So you're always looking to identify, and so we've identified that this year we really wanted to develop our science program, so we said that was a priority, so the outlay of that money would have to happen. And then underneath that, we wanted to develop intervention opportunities for math, really improve what we were doing for kids that were falling behind, and we weren't able to, that's going to have to take place over a longer period of time because we didn't have the finances to do it. So you list those priorities and you go through it that way, and been involved for many years in doing that.
Thank you. Open it up to the committee. Any questions, Mr. Rosignol?
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm going to start more on a national level and kind of work my way down, if you don't mind. No Child Left Behind is a federal act. Do you see that changing anytime soon? And do you know of any other systems that are going to be implemented in its place?
Well, it has, to a certain extent, changed. They've rewritten the law and called it something else. But I think the main thing that No Child Left Behind produced were adherence to Common Core standards. And Common Core standards that don't require teachers to make up all the content they're going to teach, can be very helpful. I do think the standards are well thought out. The question becomes, of course, how do you test those standards? How do you assess? And how can you create an assessment structure that doesn't make teachers teach artificially to the test, but really engages teachers in figuring out what works and what doesn't? And what I've learned is that focusing teachers on shorter, more formative assessments and giving them the data they need from those shorter and more formative assessments produces better conversation than taking something that happens at the end of the year and that they don't have those kids in front of them when they finally get the results in the fall. So the testing is evolving, the way of using testing. I do think that we're going to continue having standards. Massachusetts has developed standards out of the Common Core that I think are strong and that we can use, that are effective to use. I know that this district has developed, has acquired programs with the new science standards to address that I think is really valuable, is to have product and standards that as the starting point for teachers to have good conversations. So I think that'll remain, and I think that what we need to, and I think that the way of setting, levels at the state that partly came out of No Child Left Behind, a level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It's important that we pay attention to those levels. It's important that we continue to achieve. It's so that because the better you do, the more then you can not be caught up in this test preparation culture, but you can, so if you pay attention to those standards and do what you need to do on those tests, you then can set up some autonomy so that you can really think about best practice in a thoughtful way. So I think it's important to pay attention. It provides a structure that's valuable. I think that we can't get obsessed about it, and we need to figure out a way to give teachers the data they need to improve their instruction in the short term that's really valuable.
You mentioned a key word there, data. How would you use data to drive instruction? So
what I've developed in Gloucester with a colleague is a very simple database in which teachers can easily input the data from common assessments that they've developed, typically over 6 weeks or 8 weeks of work They give these kids a set of assessments. They get back analytics on that data that is fairly simple, identifying ELL kids, special ed kids, kids that are struggling, allowing them to group kids if they need to. That data comes back to them right away, because I've learned that quick, clear assessments, that teachers can surface data and then start a conversation with their colleagues that's manageable and they don't have to go to another database that's obscure to find it, but they can really use it in quick chunks, allows them to really use data and plan it. So this Google Sheets environment, I know that you've started a process for the Google Chromebooks. It works within that, and I think that keeping that simple platform is important so that teachers can use it really easily. All right, thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Rosignol. Mr. Amico?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Please describe to us your understanding of the most effective strategies for teaching. What strategies in your mind are the most effective, or which strategies are most effective for particular students? Basically, if you could, just give us your philosophy on your instructional methods. What works, what doesn't work, and where do you see Peabody now, and where do you see us, say, 2 years from now?
In terms of being effective with kids, there are a couple of things that are very important. First of all, as I talked about earlier, teachers need to be in collaborative groups where they can share data and they need that's built into their schedule, where they can share data that's manageable, reflects as close to the in the moment work of the kids, that's folded in the curriculum as much as possible, so that they can respond. You know, the best thing is if they take an exit ticket and they can look at how did these kids answer these questions, share that with their colleague. How did your kids do? What's the best way to do this? And they can go the next day, and it can affect their lesson planning with short bursts of conversation, as opposed, you know, I think that's where really teachers get excited, and taking that data and implementing it is really what makes it very rewarding to work with data for a teacher. So I think that whole data structure and meeting structure is important for best practices. The other piece is that I think you need to give teachers a common framework for how they give feedback to students, whether it's in their, I think that we need an approach that kids consistently get clear feedback from their teaching. One of the most transparent ways of seeing how kids are doing is through writing. I think that developing a coherent approach to that is really important, and giving teachers sort of a say in how that approach, and administrative leaders a say, definitely a way of collaborating and figuring out what is our best approach, and then implementing that consistently. So kids are used to getting very specific, focused feedback with clear, just like with teachers, they need clear feedback about how can I improve this based in a very specific feedback. So, you know, one thing that I've seen that really works well is, you know, very specifically in writing, when teachers give, okay, this is what I want you to work on. Here are a couple of ways of practicing it, and I want to see you do that right now in the moment. I think that's really important.
Thank you, Mr. Amico. Mr. Olympio?
Hi.
Hi, how are you, sir?
Good, thank you for coming. What is your experience with special education, and how have you had for experience in dealing with special education within the budget when they're competing, so to speak, with other aspects of the budget? And also the last part of that is keeping special education children in district. Have you had experience with that?
Yeah, no, that's been a big part of my experience. I believe that special education works most effectively when special educators and regular educators are working very closely within a long-term plan for how we're going to integrate those kids. You start with the belief that all kids want to be part of the mainstream. That's a huge incentive for kids, whether or not they have social emotional disabilities, where I've had a lot of experience, or they have learning disabilities, or whatever their disability is. Consistently, a huge incentive is to be part of the mainstream. So what you want to do, though, is for some of those kids, being part of the mainstream is not realistic for a long, long period of time. But for many kids, having a milieu where they can get the direct instruction they need, get integrated when they'll be successful, with teachers that know what's coming and can receive them effectively and get the training effectively. So you need to have proper training for all the teachers. You need to have a commitment in the building that this is how we work with kids. And you've got to build that shared vision that this enriches the experience for all the kids. That said, financially, it's that milieu structure where you're gradually bringing kids into the mainstream is not cheap in the short run. It will save you money long term by making it so that kids from don't go out of district. But initially, you've got to build it, and you've got to bring in kids gradually so that teachers get better and better at doing this. So, you want to be clear with a district that over the next 3 years, this is how we're going to do it, and we'll see costs. They may be heavier up front, in fact, but they will decline as we get better and better at this. So I think financially, you've got to build this in the long term if you want to have an effective special ed program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Topic? Okay. Mrs. Carpenter?
Thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate your time. My question is in regards to if you could tell us about your experience with the collective bargaining process in general, how you see it working with teachers, administrators, students, if you have not been part of that, how you would envision it, and specifically, if you have, how many contracts have you bargained, including, experience with grievances and arbitrations?
So you've raised a couple of different avenues. So in terms of currently, I'm working closely with on the paraprofessional contract in my district. And I'm deeply involved with that. I have been involved also with the teachers' negotiation contract in Gloucester. As a principal and as an assistant superintendent, I've dealt with grievances, more than a dozen related to whether it's employee, workplace grievance, or it's a group grievance around facility and maintenance for air quality, a wide variety of them. My philosophy on this approach is on the approach to working with the Teachers Association or working with a paraprofessional association is that it's really important that I deeply believe in how challenging and rigorous and demanding the teaching profession is, and have tremendous respect for what teachers do every day, and that I want to hear how we can support them and make their lives, they can be effective and make their lives better, and I want to hear all their issues. At the same time, there's fiscal responsibility, and you need to weigh those two and make it clear to teachers that you're always open, you're always accessible, you always listen, and you will hear them and feel that, but there's limitations to it. So that's my philosophy. There's sort of approaches about win-win approaches that have been, that many districts have tried. I think that that's wonderful if people can, that whole win-win idea, a joint interest approach is great. But the main thing to me is that I have tremendous respect for what teachers do. That respect is built every day throughout the year, so that when it comes time for negotiations, they know that I support them in their profession, and I support them in being fulfilled. I can't always deliver, we have a limited amount of money, and I'm working with the school committee and and we work together to help support teachers in that way. I think it's really important that you coordinate with not only just the school committee, obviously, who's taking the lead in these negotiations, but that you coordinate with the fire and the police and so forth, so that your raises are within a framework that's consistent with the town. You're working in this town, you're very much a part of it, and you want to support all aspects of the administration of this town. So I think having good relationships with city council, with the mayor, is really important. We work very closely in Gloucester. Our mayor's on our school committee, and I've worked really closely with her. So I think that building those relationships is really important as well.
Just to follow up on that, one of the things you said during the answer of the question was you would be always open. Is it safe to say that if you were to take the position in Peabody where it offered to you, you would have an open door policy?
Absolutely. I think, I think it's really important that people be able to communicate with you and express themselves. I think what's really important is that we all people feel comfortable communicating with all of us. Of course, we work together and set up what are our roles, and we respect each other, and we value each other's opinion, and we are clear about sort of what we do and where the boundaries are so that people know that. But I think open communication that's a sign of a healthy district when people feel like they have multiple people that they can talk to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Carpenter. Mr. Huckman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Dr. Yanofsky. Thank you to our staff and administrators that are here tonight as well. You have quite an educational background. You have a bachelor's degree from Yale University, a master's degree from Brown University, and a doctorate from Boston College. Quite significant achievements. Congratulations on those. And I see that you're also sought after. You're a finalist in the Wayland School Department as a superintendent, and unfortunately, maybe to our benefit, Watertown had you as a finalist, but elected to select the other finalist in that search. Like I said, that may be our gain and their loss. Thank you for being here. You do have quite a background as a middle school principal, and we have our middle school principal here as well, Todd Busey, and you've been quoted in some articles as talking about middle school being extremely important formative years and laying seeds and watching those flowers blossom over time. Can you just describe, I mean, a majority of your career, I think, has been in middle school. So can you just describe what you mean by that?
Well, middle school happens to be where there's a huge significant leap. If you go from 5th grade to 6th grade in the standards, there's a huge significant leap in difficulty of math, reading, the level of abstraction, complexity of text. It's a huge leap. At the same time, you're dealing with hormonal overdrive of the kids. So they're kind of competing with these emotional sort of turbulence while the academic demands are really increasing. And in that stew, if they learn that they're in a nurturing community that will be there for them, they can really connect to school in a way that serves them for the rest of their career. So for me, it was always a matter of, you will go through these ups and downs, we'll help you through them, and we'll push you. You'll learn productive struggle. You'll learn that things are not easy, and you'll come out the other end with this feeling of ability to cope with that stress, which serves you for the rest of your life. So it's a very exciting age to me. There's no question.
And I think you have, I think it was you that I read about that had an interesting philosophy on how the arts and music played into educational roles and dealing with that. Can you elaborate on that philosophy?
Sure. So I've had a profound experience. I started a summer writing program with my wife that continues today at Simmons College for middle school and high school kids. And we started in 1994, and what I found provoked kids' voice as writers. One of the most powerful experiences for them is to whether they were considered themselves a good artist or not, is to try to express themselves visually through dance, through music, because it allows them that emotional release and that expression that then they can connect. It serves as a metaphor where this is my voice, I have a unique perspective on it, and they want to share that. It serves as a metaphor. They want to share their ideas in social studies. They want to share their ideas. And so it gives them that metaphor for really engaging in the intellectual experience of middle school. So that's been really important to me.
So would it be fair to say that that would be something that would be important to you in a budgetary sense, maintaining
Sure,
arts and
absolutely.
music programs?
Absolutely.
And you did mention, if I may, Mr. Mayor, you did mention Summer Inc., the writing program that you started in 1994 and are still, I think you're secretary now, no longer president.
I'm actually chairman of the board, but
Okay. And how, if we were to offer you a position here as superintendent, how would you envision your role at Summer Inc. To be moving forward?
I don't think it would need to change. I mean, if we could certainly talk about that, but my role is, as a board member, is there are 4 meetings a year. I work with the executive director on certain teaching and learning issues as we develop the curriculum, but it's not a huge time commitment. So the program is run by someone very competent that it is not a huge time commitment for me. So.
No, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Prior to moving to Gloucester as an assistant superintendent, which seemed like it was an 11th hour, there was a change in the assistant superintendent in Gloucester took a position, and the search for your position that you fill now started in the summer of 15, and I think you were hired in August of 15. So you've had that role for a relatively brief period of time. Prior to that, you were working in Roslindale, I think, at the Washington Irving Middle School. And there's some literature on some of the challenges that existed there, and I'm sure that there were many. And one of the articles talks about bullying and how you treated bullying in Washington, at Washington Irving, and you created or started a program where you would identify students that supported other students as defenders. Can you go through the process of how that came about and what that's...
Sure, absolutely. So first of all, in order to address bullying, you need a building-wide or district-wide approach where people are trained in how to watch for it and how to recognize it, and also, but that you want to build it not just as a negative disciplinary process, but one that recognizes and rewards kids for using skills that you develop through explicit instruction in others' contexts, but applying those in situations that could be around bullying. So we would have every couple of months a ceremony and give recognition to kids that who saw a conflict and figured out a way to de-escalate that conflict with a peer, so that the conflict was not a situation in which someone got bullied, or even where that conflict could turn into not necessarily just a bullying, but a more intense conflict, and really recognize those people with buttons and certificates. And it's very important that you make that tangible, particularly at that K through 8 level. And just really, the teachers have to accept the fact that sometimes you'll be recognizing kids that aren't on the honor roll, aren't even necessarily doing their homework, but that it gives all different kinds of kids a chance to shine. And that's really important that you build that in and you train people in that way.
I think that's a great philosophy and a great program, and I commend you for having it.
Thank you.
Earlier on, Mr. Rosignol talked to you about the federal government's involvement in schools at state and district levels, and I'm going to put a little twist on that. This school committee, or 4/6, 2/3 of this school committee, a few years ago voted in opposition of the implementation of the Common Core. And I think you are a big supporter of the Common Core. And I think your background is in math, and your support for the Common Core is as I read it, talks about making math more user-friendly for Americans and for people, to motivate them to learn and be less afraid of math, and that you have an opinion that the nation has a lack of comfort with math and that holds our children back. And those are some pretty bold and powerful statements, and I'm just wondering if you can give us a little insight on what you mean by that.
Sure. So I think that We have, for example, in China, the average teacher gets through pre-calculus. In this country, the average teacher gets through our equivalent of 10th grade math. The average teacher here gets through our equivalent of 12th grade level pre-calculus or calculus. We go further, and yet their scores are consistently higher. And what you see when you research, and this was a subject of my dissertation, when you look at it, is that they are talking about why things work the way they do with their colleagues, why, and really communicating to kids and getting kids to struggle with these concepts, balancing how I do the procedure with the why it works that way, and then being able to apply it to different circumstances that I think makes them less afraid of encountering numbers. So I definitely think that there's something to learn from that. And I don't want to alienate anyone on this committee at all, but I do think that the Common Core has provided a helpful balance of the procedural with the conceptual, and it's worth, it's been helpful for teachers to really think through that and not just worry about getting them to solve problems at a 12th grade level. They need to understand what they're doing. The testing the Common Core has called for needs some improvement, there's no question.
We're also, Ms. Carpenter is chairing a committee right now on looking at the possibility of changing the time structure of our schools when they start and when they end. And I don't think we may not get to expanding the school day, but what are your thoughts on when high school students should start school as opposed to elementary students, and length of school day, and even length of school year? I mean, the state mandates 180 days, which is a minimum. I don't know what your thoughts are on whether this school district or any school district should go beyond that.
So your first question, the data is pretty clear that high school kids, and I see it in my house every day, they're better at 10 o'clock than they are at 7:30. So the question then becomes the practicality, I think. How do you deal with the transportation issues? How do you deal with after-school sports? You can't be the only one in your district that's going at a certain time because you've skewed off all the schedules. So it's a matter of the practicality. I don't think anyone's arguing necessarily with the data, but there is a pragmatic issue there about making sure that you're not out there alone, and that you do this in a way that's fiscally responsible. So for the later start time, that's how I'd respond. I think we need to be open to kids that struggle. If you have a well-designed curriculum, kids that are falling behind do benefit from having extra time. I did a program for a longer school day in Boston. We raised a lot of money to do that. We had a program during vacation for kids, but it all needs to be done within the context of the community. You need parents to support that as something that's really important to them. But I think there are opportunities for kids that are falling behind to give them more support in a longer day, because the day is very short otherwise. If you want to do the arts, you want them to play athletics, it gets difficult, and sometimes taking advantage of a few days here or there is very helpful for them if it's well designed.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Hockman. Mrs. Dunn?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dr.
Unowski,
before I start, I want to apologize for arriving late.
That's okay.
I'm very sorry. My questions are going to be about communications, and I'd just like to know, how would you describe your leadership skills in relation to communication to parents, to staff, and then to the school committee? So break it down however you'd like to answer.
So overall, what's important to me is you're part of a community that has traditions, values things that have been, and has tremendous strengths that have built up over years and years. And you have, or I have, my own experiences that I think are valuable and part of that conversation, and you find ways to build the shared vision by having, and this is where the outreach comes, by having, whether it's with school committee, and you need to, I find that retreats can be extremely helpful where you have time to really sit with them and build a relationship. I think that with principals, I think meeting with them regularly, being transparent about sort of, we're building a esprit de corps where we're all in this together, we're not competing against each other. I think that it's really important for teachers to have regular communication, whether it's in their buildings with the superintendent, knowing that this is the priorities of the superintendent, so that's whether it's coffee or snack after school and sitting down and talking and taking questions, or putting together focus groups so that you can really hear what's actually going on in the classroom. I think that all those pieces are critical for being transparent about, we're building this shared vision together, this is what it entails, these are the specific aspects of it, this is how it's going to affect the budget, and this is what we need from you, is to find out sort of what works and what doesn't, so we can continue to sharpen this message, that it's an evolving piece, but that there are these core values that are always in place.
And
so I apologize, but
no,
so I think you use all the resources you have, focus groups, your online messaging, whether it's through newsletters or through blogs, you're sitting down with people in a retreat type situation, and surveys. I think they're all really important, and you need to be accessible, and also having your door open in your office.
Okay.
Pardon me.
Okay, thank you. When you have in the past, or currently, when you have worked with all of the different constituencies, can you give us any examples of anything that you've done as far as like communication or outreach to people?
So one of the most challenging aspects is in Gloucester has been that we've had an increase in our ELL population from of 50% since I've been there. And many of the parents are coming from situations of not only poverty, but instability and an experience at school with authoritarian structures where they're not necessarily comfortable coming to school and engaging. So to recruit them in is a real challenge. So what we've done is we've built what we call coffee and conversation in the elementary school, and they come in and they learn about what is a parent conference, what am I trying to get out of it, these are the kinds of questions I should ask, and we have a back and forth with teachers and with staff from a local adult ed place that they know and they feel supported by, and then you gradually build from there to having them come for performances, and then you start recruiting them for being on parent council. So I think that's an example of sort of starting with very specific tangible benefits from parents becoming involved, and then bringing them in to a wider focus and getting their unique perspective in running your school or your district.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Mrs. Dunn. Dr. Yanofsky, a couple questions for me I want to ask about your vision for education here in Peabody. We're a level 3 school system, and certainly the next superintendent, we're going to be asking for assistance in making improvements. So could you talk about ways you can see the city improve, maybe some specifics as in the past, some of the work you have done to help improve your district in terms of those levels? If you could speak to that for a moment, please.
Yeah, so in my time in Gloucester, we've gone from being a level 3 district to a level 2 district. And important elements of that have been first identifying kids early who are falling behind and providing them with the interventions in literacy and math in particular that they need. So in order to do that, what the challenge is when you give interventions is you pull them away from core instruction. They miss core instruction, they fall behind in that area too. So what you have to do is build a very tight lesson structure so there's independent work time where kids that are achieving, blossoming, and so forth can do their independent work while you put in small groups these kids with very direct instruction that need that intervention. And we've been able to train paraprofessionals to do pretty tightly scripted interventions so that kids in K through 2 are on on target. We developed a second grade summer school as well, a summer reading program for kids who, before they went into second grade as well, hadn't blossomed yet in terms of those interventions needed more to get them so that they would be primed to take full advantage of the interventions. By the end of second grade, they'd be ready to go. So I think K through 2, getting everyone up to grade level is crucial, so they're totally engaged in the core curriculum. I think it's really important to support at the middle school level. I think it's really important to support, in addition to helping kids develop these basic skills and habits, is to really put in place a very clear, and I'm sure there are already many of these things in place, but a clear set of expectations in terms of behavior and in terms of so that kids are supported. There's a real positive climate around achievement, and teachers are trained to sort of execute that positive climate consistently. At the high school level, I think it's really important that you have here in Peabody, and I've worked with this group in Gloucester, so we've tried to pull ideas from Peabody to help us. You've got a really impressive vocational program here in a lot of different ways that involves both males and females in a way that we've really tried to learn from. And vocational programs around the state have shown the quickest growth academically. So you've got the vocational programs, and you've got AP classes that have also shown tremendous growth across the state and a real strong AP culture here. So the question is, how can what you want to do is try to, and I'm sure the high school is working on this, but unify those two visions of AP really taking text, writing about that text, vocational, hands-on, really sort of solving problems with actual product. Those can be bridged so that kids aren't slotted. They see the opportunity in being part of a variety of rigorous classes. Rigor takes on an effect that it's not just for these kinds of kids. They all can engage in it. They learn from each other, and so that it becomes a vital, very exciting institution where not just the kids that succeed academically are looking to take those boutique enrichment classes, but everyone is, because they all feel like they have an avenue. So I think, again, creating the basic skills that everyone has and shares, developing the habits, K through 8, so that the kids feel like they have a voice, and then they can shine in this sort of multi-path program at the high school where you're not just slotted into one sort of pathway. You have some pathways that are really impressive here, and I think that the work is to sort of make it so that kids can see the opportunities across those pathways as much as possible.
Thank you. One other quick follow-up. In terms of under your leadership, how would you define success? Year 1, year 2, year 3. How would you define success during your administration?
So by January, if I'm hired July 1st, I'd want to have built that shared vision I discussed that has reached out to school committee, city council, mayor, town officials, townspeople, but parents, teachers, leaders. And we have a shared vision that has identified priorities going forward that are specific enough that they implicate certain steps in the budget, and it's very clear and transparent, and the budget flows from there. And that in that first 6 months, we have a clear blueprint for not only the budget for the first year, but where we'd want to go years 2 and 3 as well. And then I think that I'd want to see that, and again, I don't want to be presumptuous, because these things may, I don't want to say that they don't exist now in strong points, but what I'd want to do is really build on those strong points in terms of what kind of interventions do we have for the elementary kids that in the core program, like I described. Do we have a substantial set for that K through 2 group, a clear sense of collecting data on them, a way of assessing their progress in K through 2, identifying kids that are falling behind and giving them the interventions they'd want. I'd want to see that over the first couple of years in place really strongly. I'd want to see in the high school sort of this bridging piece. That requires the high school teachers to really sort of have that shared vision of excellent instruction that's a combination of what you see in AP classes, what you see in vocational classes, That takes time, but that have the principal and the assistant superintendent and all sort of working together so that they have identified their vision for instruction, and the teachers are excited about that, and that there's professional development both during the school year and during the summer that shows them working towards, whether it's an inquiry-based approach, whatever we're going to call it, that there is a focus for excellent instruction in the high school. So again, elementary, that there are interventions in place to catch kids that are falling behind. I think that the middle school should have a clear sense of what its values are in terms of supporting kids, both how do they find their voice as they get into more complex areas, how are kids, is there a clear approach to teaching reading and writing at the middle school? And then in high school, sort of how have we bridged these very strong programs so that kids are taking advantage of them across the board?
Thank you. We have about 12 minutes. We can get started a few minutes after 5. I know there's some other quick questions that some of the members would like to make. Sure. So I'd like to give them the opportunity to maybe ask a couple of quick questions to you.
Sure. Thank you.
First, Mr. Rosignol, then we're going to go to Mr. Amico.
Thank you. You actually stole one of my questions, so it'll be a little bit shorter. You mentioned interventions a number of times as far as pulling students out and making sure that we maximize their achievement. Now that takes money. Money, in my mind, entails going after grants. What is your experience with going after grants, writing grants, or seeking and securing grants?
So as I said, I got a federal grant of, a couple $1 million as a principal to extend the school day in Boston. I've been responsible for all the grant writing for the district in Gloucester, from the state grants, federal grants, to sort of foundation grants. We've obtained the Mass Life Sciences grant for $175,000 for the middle school and the high school to sort of bring in life science products into the district. So I've had a lot of different experience. I do think you're absolutely right that it costs money. I do think that there are ways of using special ed paraprofessionals and in these groups at different points in the day where you can train them so they can work with a couple of regular ed kids and a couple of special ed kids, and you can create some efficiencies there that aren't always more expensive. On the other hand, you're absolutely right that often it costs money.
And then one further question. I know you mentioned technology in the past. How do you see technology in education, and how do you see that as a tool for teachers? So,
technology is not a magic pill. You can give teachers a classroom that has Chromebooks for every student, and they can assign Google Classroom to them, and they can sit at their desk and read the newspaper while the kids answer questions. So it's a tool, and it doesn't replace sort of the need for an outstanding teacher in the classroom. However, it does provide a vehicle for teachers to show things to kids that is really powerful, to gather data on kids that's really powerful, organize their lives in a way that's really powerful, allow students to quickly access things, the what. They still have to think about the why and the how, but they can gather the what, very quickly, as we've seen. As we all know, that's transformative. So I think that if you handle it properly, it can get you right to the deeper, more challenging conversations for kids, and can eliminate sort of some of the obstacles that come for kids that struggle with their handwriting. So I think that they can be extremely valuable tools. Again, you've got to start with, if we're about asking kids to answer challenging questions, the teachers have to design those questions. It doesn't get laid out for them, no matter how great the product is.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Rosignol. Mr. Amico?
Thank you. Great job so far. Currently, Peabody students go to school 180 days, 990 hours. In some cases, I think we have an exemption for 900 hours of instruction. We're a level 3 district right now. Do you think it's doable, so to speak, to get to the level 2 status with those numbers in front of you? And if not, how would you try to change those?
Oh, absolutely. It's possible with 180 days and 900 some odd hours. It's absolutely possible. I think that you can get some gains by doing some auxiliary things, particularly for kids that struggle. But I think you've got to give teachers the data that they need, give them the time to discuss it during the school day, and guide them with the central office and principal leadership, guide them in figuring these things out, having perspective of what works, not just in that grade level, but the central office needs to help in what's going to work K through 12. Absolutely, I think that if you do those things, the talent is there. It just needs to be, galvanized behind a, shared vision, and people need the time and the structure to sort of engage in those conversations.
Thank you, Mr. Miko. Do you have a question? I'm good. Any further questions? Mr. Hockman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dr. Yanofsky, we currently have a significant MSBA project going on with the construction of the Higgins Middle School. That committee was chaired by Ms. Dunn, and we're now in phase 2 and 3 and maybe 4 and 5, Ms. Dunn? Just 2, where we're constructing athletic fields with where the old building was. We also have some older, significantly older elementary schools and a high school that is in somewhat disrepair, and in a survey that we put out to parents, one of the primary responses was for the construction of a new high school. So my question to you is, what experience, if any, do you have with the MSBA? What experience, if any, do you have writing statements of interest?
Absolutely. So Gloucester also has old buildings, and we are in the process. We just brought online one new elementary school this year, and I was, involved in that end of that process as I joined, which is those regular meetings that you need to set up so that you move towards your punch list and you work sort of very diligently to make sure that everything is in place for the kids. And now I've worked very closely with the superintendent to develop a statement of interest for that has been, now we're going into feasibility study for the two buildings that may be made into one campus on another piece of land. And so the feasibility study will tell us what's possible and what's the best approach. So I've been at both ends of those experiences, and know that you've also got to work with, the MSBA lays out a really good, clear process, and it's really financially valuable, obviously, to participate. And you don't always have to build new buildings. That may not, there's a political equation there about what makes for the best for the district, but there's also a fiscal question there about what's practical, and I think that you can do a lot within 4 walls of using MSBA funds to renovate as well. So I think there are those opportunities, and I know you're considering a variety of opportunities for your schools, and I think that's wise.
If you were to be selected as the superintendent of Peabody Public Schools, how do you envision your role in the city of Peabody?
Well, I'm here. I can't wait to be in this community, and as I said, my kids are going off to one's in college and one's going off after next year, and I love being part of a community. I see myself being at all the constantly at events, whether it's arts or athletics. They're all important to me, and but also being part of the community outside the schools, because I think it's really important for me to, in order for the school system to be supported, them to realize how much I respect sort of where people are coming from that are not necessarily parents, that they have to foot the bill for the future that we're talking about, which is going to require funding. And I need to spend time with them, and I really enjoy that. I enjoy the really listening and hearing and being part of a community, and I really enjoyed that as a principal, and I'm really excited. And again, this is a town that really I would be excited to be a part of deeply. So I think that I would spend a lot of time getting to know a lot of different people. and enjoying that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Hockman. We got about 5 minutes. I have one more question. I'm going to give you the opportunity at the end to, for a minute or two to summarize your thoughts. A question I had for you, certainly Peabody, like every community, there's going to be challenges, across a variety of different examples, from financial challenges, disciplinary challenges, all kinds of different issues that pop up here, certainly in classrooms and in schools. But a lot of it comes to the superintendent's desk. And can you talk about maybe a very challenging situation that you were met with, how you faced it, and how you resolved that issue?
So 2 weeks ago, I had worked for 9 months with a teacher committee, K through 5, to decide on a new science program. Fairly significant outlay for the district. I know you've made that outlay recently at I believe at the middle school and high school. There's new science standards that require kids to really engage with the materials. The materials are expensive. There's costs year to year because of disposables and all that stuff. We had tried out 4 products. They had piloted each of them. I wanted them to make the decision because I felt like the central office had chosen 4 programs that would all work, and then we wanted them to choose. They got to the point where they narrowed it down to 2, and then we had to decide. They piloted some more, visited schools, and then we had to decide on 1. And that morning I got an email that said, "We don't want to decide this year," from 4 or 5 of the committee. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's not a good email. So because we're not in a position, and I met with them, and I had really worked closely with all 15 members of the committee, so I felt like they trusted me, and I said, we have to make a decision this year, really. Even if you don't feel comfortable because you don't feel like you don't feel ready to, I really believe that you are ready, and if we don't, we won't be following the state's direction to be aligned in 3 years, and that's really important. And I think that that and saying that let's remember what you've been through. I have confidence in your decision making. This is what we've seen in these 2 programs. Let's put on the board the strengths and the weaknesses, and I think we'll be ready to make a decision. Sure enough, they were able to do that, and I think what that shows is sort of I'm a calm person. I listen very closely when people express sort of anxiety about situations. I take those anxieties seriously, and then we make a plan. There's oftentimes a reality that constricts your ability to do whatever you want. This is what we're dealing with. This is the task we've been assigned. Let's see if we can get to our goal with people feeling comfortable. And I think that's being transparent and listening very closely, and then being decisive and strong in the face of other people's sort of nervousness, I think is something that's very important to me.
Well, thank you, Dr. Yanofsky. We enjoyed this interview greatly. I wanted to give you the opportunity, with just a minute or 2 remaining, maybe to make a closing statement or make some final comments to us as a board.
Sure. I started by saying that this is the community I'd really like to be a part of, professionally and emotionally, and I really believe that. I have done my research and my thinking about Peabody, and I really think that the diversity, the size is just a wonderful combination for me. I believe that, there are 3 parts of what I really believe in as an educator that are crucial. One is that have a community that wraps around its kids and really believes that we serve all the kids here, and I really believe that here it takes place. That teachers are in a position to be listened to, and the leadership team sort of provides them with a structure so that we can hear what's working, what's not, and respond and build on sort of the data that they're gathering and the great practices they're showing. And then finally, the students, that this is an experience of empowering students. You have it in your core values, but I think that also it's true in that I see a variety of different kinds of kids, whether they're in the vocational program, their AP program, really blossoming here, that you do value different kinds of kids, and you value this as an experience of by the end of this, they're going to have a vision for how their perspective is unique, how they can influence other people, and how they can go forward and have an impact on their community, which often is this one, which I think is a wonderful fact that they feel really close to this community. So be a privilege to work here and to be here for many years.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Open up your books to page 360.
Did you just look at your phone while you was in class? You played yourself.
Talking about inspirational quotes.
You gotta believe in yourself. Don't ever play yourself. The key is to make it, so make it.
Louise, can you give me an example of an inspirational quote?
Don't play yourself. The key is to make it.
And who said that?
I did. Now that's a major key alert.
Learn the real major keys to getting to college at getschool.com.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
Don't wait. Communicate. Make your emergency plan today.
Good evening. I'd like to introduce Laura Chesson, is the next candidate to be interviewed. Dr. Chesson, it's great to have you here with us this evening. My name is Ted Bettencourt, Mayor of the city. You've had the opportunity to briefly meet our school committee members. We are an elected member, or elected group. I, as mayor, serve as the chairman of the committee. And we're going to ask you a series of questions tonight, just to get a sense about your philosophy and some of your experiences. And but clearly your resume was outstanding. Very happy to have you here as part of the group that we're interviewing. I wanted to afford you the opportunity to maybe for a 2 or 3 minute opening statement, kind of what has brought you here tonight and what was your interest in the city of Peabody.
Now? Yeah. I'm used to a green light, not a red light, so that's the thing that threw me. Good evening. I want to thank you first for the opportunity to come and meet with all of you. I know what a time-consuming function it is to be part of a committee that's looking for a new superintendent, so I want to thank you. I want to just take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about the why behind my resume. You have a what that in front of you that tells you about all the things that I've done, but I just briefly want to tell you sort of what other drivers behind that. I think of this as my core values and beliefs, and to me these are the non-negotiables in education. And the first thing for that is to have a school environment that's characterized by a growth mindset. And as a parent of 2 students, one of which school was very easy for, and she was very successful in school, and another student who was challenged by school, I certainly am looking for every student to be able to grow to their fullest potential. But the way they need to do that is by utilizing the human capital. Education is a human capital endeavor, and so relationships are with faculty, with staff, with administrators. These are all the most important parts of the building that growth environment. Not only is the growth environment important for the student, but it's also important for the adults. When we ask people to learn, we're asking them to take a risk. And the only way they're going to take a risk is if they're in a trusting growth environment, and trust only comes from relationships. Growth cannot happen in the absence of strong, trusting relationships, because it's like the water, the ecosystem that fosters that. And finally, I believe that in order for our students to be prepared for the future, we need to not only develop their knowing, but their understanding. It's not enough for them to have content area knowledge, but they need to be able to apply that. They need to deeply understand that. And again, I go back to my two students that we have raised up. One was very good at the knowing, but not so good at the understanding and applying. She definitely could learn with a textbook in a closet and a flashlight, but she was not always so good at applying that knowledge to real-world problems. The other one had more trouble with the knowing, the memorizing of content, the learning of math facts, but when it came to application, she was excellent. And so we looked for those educational environments that would build on her strength and help her with her challenges. And so these are the reasons that I came to education. And lastly, I would say that in my investigating the city of Peabody, I found that you are also interested in the whole child. You have a comprehensive high school that has both a vocational program and a strictly academic program. And those are programs that both my children, one of my daughters went to a vocational school and the other one went to a strictly academic school. So the kinds of programs that you have, even in the community, the recreation programs, the libraries that you have, really talk to how you're looking at to educating the whole child, and that's something I'm very interested in. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chesson. I'm going to start off with a question, just because now we're getting into the thick of it in terms of our budget. And really, budget is an all-year-round endeavor, but we're going to be tackling it in more detail over the next few weeks. Could you talk about your budget experience, maybe with some specific examples of budgets that you've worked on, areas of focus, things of that nature, please?
Sure. I came to education after spending 10 years in industry. I worked for 10 years as a manager for IBM, managing all the programmers that supported manufacturing for the Northeast region of the United States. So I came to education with a significant amount of budget experience, and as a matter of fact, many of the programmers who I managed supported the ledger and budget systems within IBM manufacturing. So I brought that into education with me and what the outside industry would use in terms of the budgeting process and the monitoring of fiscal management over the year. When I came into being an administrator in education, I was immediately thrown into the deep end of the pool in terms of educational budgets. I've been an assistant principal, I've been a principal in both those jobs, assistant principal in Leominster, principal in Maynard, and in both those jobs had to develop a building budget. Since coming to Arlington, I've been very, very involved in the budgeting process. As a matter of fact, we had kind of a unique situation happen this year. The chief financial officer of the district resigned about a month and a half ago. So we are also in the throes of the budget process. We sent our budget to the printer on January 27th. So knowing that the CFO was going to be leaving, I've always been involved in the budget, and one of the reasons is that salaries and curriculum materials, instructional materials, and instructional supports are a very large part of the budget. So therefore, I've been very involved in the budgeting process. About 3 years ago, though, I started working with the CFO and the communications director, who also writes grants for the district, to look at how we might improve our budget process. Too often in education, what happens is the elementary people come in and they present what they would like. The middle school principals and staff come in and present what they would like. The high school staff presents what they would like, and then some kind of virtual arm wrestling goes on. And usually what happens is that may be good for an individual school or an individual level, but it's not very good for the district. And so 3 years ago, we began the process of coming up with what are the focus items that we want to focus on across the district interim strategic planning. So the two drivers that we came up with were closing the achievement gap and also the enrollment growth. Arlington has had 500 additional students join the district within the last 3 years. We have a graduating class of about 320 going out, with a kindergarten class coming in of about 452 came in this year. So the enrollment growth was tremendous, and so part of the budget process was to respond to that enrollment growth. The second part of the focus of the budget process was closing the achievement gap, so that when we looked at the requests for budget, they came from elementary, middle, and high school. Because we had agreed as an administrative team and also based this on the long-term goals of the school committee, we're also in line with this, we were able to quickly pick out those things that would, if we had to choose for cuts or those of increases based on those two focus items. I helped the superintendent put together the budget book package that goes to the finance committee, that goes to the long-range planning committee for the town. On Monday night, I will be going to the finance committee meeting with her to present the budget. I attend the town meeting hearings on the budget and oftentimes get asked to answer questions about that. The last thing I'd like to add is that through my work with the capital committee for the town, when I came to Arlington 5 years ago, the amount of money that was set aside each year for technology was about $125,000. As I've said, we had growing enrollment, which means that we're hiring more teachers. That $125,000 barely would allow us to replace teacher devices on a 5 to 7 year replacement cycle, and it really had very little money available for students. My work with the long-range planning committee in the town and the capital committee of the town have increased that budget 3 years ago to $400,000, and so we have a commitment from the long-range planning and also the capital committee that a 5-year commitment, which we believe has been picked up now for 2 more years, so a 7-year commitment of somewhere between $400,000 to $425,000 to support technology. So those are some of the activities that I've done around budgets.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open it up and start with Mr. Rosignol.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. The first question I have for you is, every Student Success Act is going to be taking over for No Child Left Behind. Can you just tell me the differences in those two federal programs?
Well, the difference changed every minute. I was actually looking at something that came up about ESSA early today. I think the future of ESSA is fairly uncertain at this point. Let me just say that I can tell you what it has meant in Massachusetts thus far. So one of the changes that have come out through the Department of Education recently is that up in the last couple of years, there's been a real focus on district-determined measures, which has been part of the evaluation process, and teachers were rated not only on their performance, but also on how students grew on those 2 district-determined measures. That has changed, and those are no longer going to be separate measures. That measure will be part of the teacher evaluation system under Standard 2, which, whether it's a separate line item under Standard 2 or it's overall in Standard 2, has yet to be seen. That's actually where it should be, because if a teacher is, there's no way a student can grow without a teacher doing their job, and if a teacher is doing their job, there's going to be some student growth. Now, that will vary from student to student depending on their educational background and challenges, but I've always thought that that's where it should be. In addition, there's a fair amount of change that's taking place right now looking at the accountability system. And there's a proposal on the table. Up until this point, schools were given a rating anywhere from 1 to 5, 1 and 2 being those that didn't require any intervention by the State Department of Education, level 3s that might possibly have interventions necessary, and then levels 4s and 5s, which have had everything from intervention, the state takeover. There is a proposal on the table that's going to the Board of Education that's in response to ESSA, that level 1s and 2s would actually be grouped together, and that 3s, 4s, and 5s would be grouped together. You know, there's a lot of reasons why that might happen. And some of that can be that a school could become a level 2 or 3 depending on a participation rate. I know I personally have put in a number of appeals for the last 3 years because we have a high school that would be level 1 if we looked at their scores, but a level 3 if we look at their participation rate of a subgroup, and that participation rate has dropped because we've had a number of students who have been hospitalized for social emotional reasons. And either they've just come back to school or they're out on hospitalization, and the State Department of Education up to this point has treated them as just not taking the test. So in order to appeal that, we've had to write letters and get medical documentation regarding those students. So those are some of the changes that the department is taking a look at. It'll be interesting to see. Massachusetts has always sort of been out in front, so it will be interesting to see if ESSA gets denied, which a lot of the elements of ESSA have been taken back over the last couple days. They just recently took away the template that each state was going to have to put in, and they've given out a new template as of this afternoon. So it's kind of like a moving target. But in Massachusetts, I think that we are still going to have our own set of accountability measures, and these are the things that I think will probably be driving that.
Speaking of measures in the DOE, what is your feelings regarding standardized testing, MCAS 2.0, PARC, whatever you want to call it?
Okay. I think it's one measure, and I think in some ways it's helpful because it does allow us to compare ourselves to how other schools are doing. It does give us some information on our curriculum scope and sequence. I think that it cannot be the only measure. I think there are other things that we need to look at. I talked in my opening remarks about educating the whole child. MCAS 2.0, if it is PARC-like, which is what we expect that they rubbed off the PARC and they put the MCAS 2.0 on the outside. Actually, they're now calling it MCAS Next Generation, as opposed to MCAS Legacy. Does not measure critical thinking, does not as much as we would like. It does not measure social emotional growth, perseverance, the ability to persist if I'm in a difficult situation. The ability to communicate is tested somewhat, but not all. So I think that you have to develop a set of metrics that you want to use to define what is success within your district. So I think that MCAS Next Generation is one of those things, but I think that you need a fuller body of metrics to take a look at.
So on that, how would you develop that metrics?
Okay, so district determined measures, which in Arlington were developed from the ground up from teaching staff, were really based on common assessments that we've had in place for about the last 7 years. We asked teachers, what are the most important things you want kids to know and be able to do at the end of your year with them, and what are the best measures for those? So I have a curriculum council, and I also have a curriculum board that's made up of all the curriculum directors, the literacy specialist, and several of the math coaches. So information comes from the curriculum council. It also comes from this curriculum board, and then it also gets shared with the administrative team. It needs to be an inclusive process. If we don't set measures that are meaningful, manageable, and measurable, then the real process or the real benefit from these measures, which is to inform instruction so then we can better meet the needs of our students, is not going to happen. So those would be the ways that I would bring that forward.
Thank you. I'll yield to my counterparts, but thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Rosignol. Mr. Amico?
Thank you, Dr. Chason. You mentioned instruction. Could you give us your experience with instruction and how to different strategies and what are the newer instructions out there that possibly could help Peabody teachers moving forward?
Sure. So I was in the classroom, and my first teaching experience was in Bernalillo, New Mexico. Bernalillo is about 20 miles outside of Albuquerque, and it might as well be 200 miles outside of Albuquerque. 50% of my students were Native American and spoke a language that has no written form. Keres is the language they spoke, and it has only an oral form. So students would come to kindergarten with very little home literacy, but a great, rich oral tradition. 40% of my students were also Hispanic, and then about 10% of my students were what they would have called in New Mexico Anglo. That's the environment I started teaching in. It was a very interesting environment for me because the vast majority of my students were used to working in groups. It was actually difficult to get them to work on something individually, which is very different from other parts of the United States where it's hard to get kids to work in groups and they want to work on things individually. That sort of set my mindset for what good instruction looks like. I saw things happening there that I took with me as I moved back to Massachusetts. So I think that some of the strategies for instruction, one of those things is a growth mindset, helping students to understand that smart is something you grow to be, not something you're born. Too often students say, well, I'm not good at math, my brother wasn't good in math, my parents weren't good in math. That's not a growth mindset, that's a fixed mindset. So having every teacher believe that it's his or her personal responsibility for every student to grow as far as possible is important. There was a study that the Noyce Foundation did, oh my God, it must have been like 1994, 1995, that looked at the old MEP test, which MCAS replaced. And they wanted to look and see what kind of math curriculum actually had the biggest impact at middle school. And the study showed that it was not the type of curriculum or the specific curriculum. Is it CMP? Is it Thinking Mathematically? Is it the Chicago Math Series? But rather the questions that the teacher asked the student that really made the determination of how they did on the MCAS. The teachers who would probe for student understanding, teachers that made sure that every student in the classroom was engaged. Every student in the classroom felt like they needed to pay attention. It's called unanxious expectations. So we don't want you to be anxious, but we want you to know the expectation is that you are engaged in what's happening. Those are kind of the techniques. I think probably good teachers steal from other good teachers. And John Safier recently released a book called Highly Effective Teaching, and I've been running a mini course for the teachers in Arlington, a blended learning online mini course, where they look at this, and he has 50 structures, but he focuses on the kinds of questions that you asked, having every student be engaged, have every student feel like you care whether they learn or not, that smart is something that you can get, and really work on the phrase, when a student says, I don't know how to do that, you say, you don't know how to do that yet. Technology can help with that. We hear a lot about differentiation of instruction. When you have 28, 29, 30 kids in a class, and I had that the last year I taught in Boston, I had 30 students in my classroom in Math 2, some of which were freshmen taking a sophomore class, some were sophomores taking a sophomore class, and some were juniors retaking a sophomore class. And so in order to be able to differentiate instruction and better meet the needs of all students, technology is a real key way. But technology for technology's sake, a bad class with technology is just a bad class with technology. So good instruction weaves that technology and helps you support students better.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Miko. Mr. Olympio?
Thank you for being here. What is your experience with special education, more specifically some of the challenges that you would face as far as budget concerns with special education, and also whether a child should stay in district or out of district?
My personal experience is that I have a student who actually had a 504 plan, not a special education plan. So for those who might not understand the difference, 504 is a student who has a disability, but they only receive accommodations, as IEPs are for students who have modifications. But I tell you that so that you can understand that I've experienced at least the challenges that parents have. I've experienced the challenges that teachers have in a fully included classroom, and I have experience as an administrator. So last year, the special education director for Arlington was to go out on maternity leave, and she was supposed to go out in June, and she was supposed to be gone for the summer. Great plan. I was going to cover for her. Nothing really happens in the summer. It'll be fine. Man plan, God laughs. So she went on bed rest in March, and so she was out from March until September. So thankfully she had a healthy baby, everything worked out well, and she does really good at answering emails and telephone calls. But I covered the special education department for that time period for her. There were certainly administrators also on her team that helped that out, but unfortunately the big problems sort of got to my desk. Luckily for me, since I came to Arlington 5 years ago, I've been working very closely with the special education department. I meet with the coordinators for high school, middle school, and the 2 coordinators for elementary special education, and the preschool coordinator for special education every other week. We talk about a variety of things, the interface between general education and special education, but we also talk about things about students going out of district. What is the SST, the student support team process? What's the RTI process? That's response to intervention process. How can we set up an RTI process so that we try to get as much as possible students to get to special education referrals because we've tried everything else, not because we're having problems, let's refer them for special education testing. We have spent a lot of time each year looking at what programs do we have in district? What programs do we have out of district? When can we bring a program into district? We don't have right now a literacy-based program within the district for students who have literacy-based disabilities. We're getting to the point where we're going to probably bring that back into the district because we've looked at what we're spending for out-of-district tuition, and at this point it makes it more cost-effective for us to bring that program back into the district. We looked at alternative programs. So we used to send the vast majority of our students out of district that have severe social emotional needs. Last year or 2 years ago, we started a program at the high school called Millbrook. We expanded that program this year to the middle school so that we have an alternative program so less students are getting sent out. Arlington actually has the second highest in the state number of foster beds. So I don't mean parents who foster children, but actually foster homes. And so we had to come up with a way to help those students transition, many of which have interrupted schooling, have severe social emotional needs. We had to come up with a way, besides sending them out of district, to transfer them into the school district. So we have a process called Safe Harbor now that helps them to transfer in. We have specialized learning communities. So we have one elementary school has an autism program, or Asperger's on the autism spectrum. One elementary school has a cognitive delayed program or cognitive disability program, and one elementary school has a social emotional program. So as much as possible, that has helped us to keep students at the elementary level within the district. We have those 3 programs at the middle school. We have those 3 programs at the high school. I think the biggest challenge that we face right now is just really constantly monitoring those programs. I want to make sure that students get exactly what they need, and whenever possible, try to keep them in our home district.
Thank you. She actually answered my follow-up questions.
Thank you, Mr. Limpio. Mrs. Carpenter?
Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Chesson. I appreciate your time here. My question is in regards to collective bargaining. Could you tell us about your experience with collective bargaining in general and how you see the bargaining process working into the work of teachers, administrators, and students?
If you have the right players at the table, interest-based bargaining is a really good tool. Interest-based bargaining, if you're not familiar with that, is where each party comes to the table with the list of the things that are of most interest to them, as opposed to a proposal from this side, a proposal from that side, or a counter proposal going back and forth. In our last teacher's contract, we used interest-based bargaining, but we had definitely the right players. We had the superintendent who was at the table, who was definitely committed to interest-based bargaining. We had a union president that was definitely interested in union-based bargaining. We had school committee members that were interested in that. While I was not directly at the table in that, and I will tell you about some negotiations where I was at the table, I was involved in that, because one of the things that was brought about was that when Arlington went to the GTC for their health insurance, which is a statewide consortium. When they went to that 7 years ago, the reason the union agreed to it was so that sometime within the next 4 or 5 years, we would look at our salaries in relationship to what we call the town manager 12, or 12 other districts that we would compare ourselves to. And they differ from the DART districts because we really look at, the DART districts don't always look at the percent of socioeconomically stressed students that you have in the district. They don't often look at the percentage of students that have special education plans within the district. So the town manager had come up with a list of 12 school districts, 12 communities that we could compare ourselves to. And when we looked at our salaries, we were on the bottom, not the very bottom, but the bottom of that first half. So there had been a commitment made to the local teachers union that we would come back to the table and look at the possibility of changing the lanes and the steps based on the savings that the town had realized from GTC. That same commitment was made to the AAA, which is the administrators union. And so I worked with the superintendent to try to analyze a number of factors that we would take a look at to see where in the grids our people should move. So we looked at equity in terms of the directors and the administrator level. We looked at the town manager 12, not just in terms of salary, but also other factors in our contract, longevity. We also looked at the length of the school day, and we're sad to see that we had the shortest school day of any schools in the town manager 12. So when we looked at those things, I helped the superintendent and the CFO come up with what our proposal would be for the new steps and lanes, and that was agreed to. So even though I wasn't at the table, I was involved in putting together that package. So 2 areas of bargaining that I have been involved with. The first is the new teacher evaluation system. So as part of the new teacher evaluation system, I worked with the head of the union, and in my application package, you'll actually see a letter of recommendation from the person who was the president of the union my first 4 years in Arlington. She and I worked very closely together to talk about how we would implement the new teacher evaluation system. We actually did all the trainings together for the pilot for the teacher evaluation system. We headed up the committee that for the last 3 years has reviewed the teacher evaluation system and said what's working, what's not, and has made some changes to the contract each year, some minor tweakings. In addition, one of the things that became very important to our town was to have more time for elementary teachers to plan. And so she and I worked together to devise a plan that would be acceptable to all parties in order to have an early release day every Tuesday afternoon, and how elementary teachers stay until 3 o'clock. Normally they would be dismissed at 2:35 on Tuesday afternoons, so we were able to come up with a plan on how students would be dismissed at 1 o'clock every Tuesday afternoon, and then negotiated what that time would be. So of those 4 normally 4 meetings a month. One meeting a month is focused on building needs and building meetings with the principal. 2 meetings a month are focused on grade level team meetings so that everybody in 1st grade at a school, everybody in 5th grade at a school could meet and plan together and look at data around student performance so they could make adjustments to curriculum instruction. And then the last one would be for professional development. So those would be the 2 areas that I've been directly involved in negotiating with the union. And as I said, I'm a resource for all the other contracts.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Carpenter. Mr. Hockman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Dr. Chesson. Quite an interesting road that you've traveled to get in front of us tonight. Starting with your education, you left Massachusetts to go to college in New York. Worked for IBM for 10 years. Traveled to New Mexico, where I hope you became a Tony Hillerman fan. I don't know if you read Tony Hillerman.
Robert Parker. No, not Robert Parker. What's the other? The person who writes the Stone Barrington books actually wrote books in New Mexico as well. Yeah.
Okay. And then you spent some time in New Paltz.
That's where I got my certification, yes.
Yeah, I spent some time in New Paltz when we were probably there around the same time. And then back to Massachusetts and on this path. And I think you did your graduate work at UMass Lowell.
I did.
And you did you conducted a research study on the nature of teacher leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be a focus of a lot of your responses here today.
It is.
And I think a focus of your philosophy as a superintendent. Do you want to expand upon what you mean by teacher leadership and maybe some of the findings that you had in that study?
My research was looking at a Boston pilot school. Pilot schools in Boston are in-district charter schools that have freedom to, on budget, they get a per pupil expenditure lump sum based on what other schools in Boston get, and they're able to use that for however they see fit on the school day. So every year, working conditions would be a much broader way to discuss that. So every year the faculty gets together and talks about what working conditions they would like to see. So when the school day starts, when it ends, what the schedule looks like, how many preps you have, all those things are under the control of the school itself. The school is run by a leadership team, and that leadership team involves a large number of faculty representation. They set policy and procedure for the school. It is an extremely successful school. The Boston Arts Academy is the only public high school for the visual and performing arts in Massachusetts, and it has an extraordinarily high graduation rate. It has an extraordinarily high college acceptance rate for a public high school in Boston. Its students are accepted on an academic blind and are really brought in because of their passion for the arts. So while on paper they probably have 30% special education, they probably have more like 60% because a lot of students were encouraged to drop their special education certification. They were told that they would be more likely to get admitted to the school when nothing was further from the truth. But, it's hard to get those things stopped in the community. I tell you that to let you know the school environment that we developed in. So my thinking came from looking at this school and why were they successful? Why did they have this success rate with students that have the same population as, if not more challenging than every other school in Boston? And it became very clear that it was the teacher leadership. So not only did teachers sit on the instructional leadership team for the building, they also rotated as the department chairs. So there were no formalized department chairs in the sense somebody gets hired as the department chair. They also had a very public way of teaching and learning. It was not uncommon for other faculty to come into your classroom and observe you teach if you were doing something that they were interested in, or if you had a strength that they needed to see. Teaching and learning was very public. Very often other schools would come in and they would come through the building. I used to joke that my kids thought they were the third stop on the tour. So it definitely make for very public teaching and learning. There was a change in leadership While I was, right before I did my research, from the time I left there till the time I decided that that's what I was going to do my research. And I thought that I might see changes to the school or changes to their success rate, because often if you have a very charismatic leader, and Dr. Linda Nathan was a very charismatic leader, that you would see less of success. And nothing could have been further from the truth. So when I started doing my investigation, I saw that it is because of the strength of the teachers and the teacher leadership in the building, and meeting with each other and holding each other accountable to what they agreed that they would do to better meet the needs of the students, that really interested me. So that's why I decided to do my research on their program. I'm very lucky in that, as I said, I worked very closely with the union leadership in Arlington. So when I said, what would you think about a formalized teacher leadership program here in Arlington, she was ready to jump right in. And so over the last 5 years, we've developed a number of teacher leadership programs. We have lab site classrooms. So we have teachers who have volunteered to be lab sites in the elementary level. So 6 to 8 teachers will volunteer to participate in the lab site program, and they will go to visit this teacher's classroom once a week. First, they will watch the teacher teach. Then the teacher will have broken the class into small groups. They will work with one of those small groups. They will then step out into the hallway. They will discuss what they've seen. They will have discuss what their experience was in the small group with one of the literacy specialists, and then they will go back to their classrooms to teach that lesson. And then they will debrief online, because we are a Google Suites district, so we use Google Classroom and Google Communities to discuss how that goes in their classroom. Those lab site teachers will then videotape the rest of their week, and we'll put those videotapes up so every day the teachers can watch the lesson that the other teacher taught the day before. Those teachers were picked because of their enthusiasm for opening their classrooms, not because we thought they were perfect, but because we thought that they understood the curriculum and they were willing to put themselves out there. Those teachers then expanded to now provide all the professional development around that grade. So if I'm the first grade lab site teacher, I do professional development for literacy on Tuesday afternoons when we have professional development for grade 1. This has been so successful that next year we're going to be expanding it into science and into mathematics at the elementary school level. We run a graduate level class for these teachers based on our feedback from them about what they need. Coaching people when you're not evaluating them, how to have difficult conversations with people, how to sort of nudge people along. These are the kinds of things that they told us that they needed, and those are the things that we've been putting in place. We participated as part of a professional learning community with other districts in the state regarding our teacher leadership program, and we were acknowledged by the State Department of Education as one of the exemplars in teacher leadership across the state.
Thank you. That was more than a comprehensive answer, and I was having some difficulty comprehending how this theory that you developed would be implemented. I mean, you write, and the data suggested that structural choices that the school had made, such as the creation of teacher-led curriculum in grade-level teams, team-taught writing courses, professional development partners, school opening professional development workshops, and clearly articulated hiring process made significant contributions to the ability of this school, speaking of that Boston Arts Academy, to implement and nurture teacher leadership. And I wonder, now in your role as an assistant superintendent in Arlington, how you manage those thoughts or those ideas when there's conflict. Because it seems to me that when you have particular buildings that have teachers with perhaps different philosophies on curriculum or teaching styles, I would imagine that conflict has to arise at some point. And how do you keep that theory of empowering teachers together when someone maybe there's compromise, or you can explain.
Sure. I think communication is part of that. Really, so as I said, I have a curriculum council that meets with me once a month, and we talk. We had a curriculum council, now those people have become teacher leaders. So I'm meeting with the teacher leaders and I'm meeting with the literacy specialists. We're talking about what's working and what's not working. When we implement a new science program, for example, we talked about how to roll that out in the curriculum council. When we chose the new science program, we talked about what science program we were going to choose. Teachers have input into that. And they have instructional leadership teams within their buildings. I think that also not only has to come from the bottom up, but it has to come from the top down in the sense that the administrators are all on the same page. I'd have to say, when I came to Arlington 5 years ago, there were a lot of very different things happening in the 7 elementary schools. Because of the curriculum council, because of my meeting with elementary principals once a month, because of the coaches that we've hired to go into the buildings and help teachers implement new curriculum, being an elementary school teacher is extraordinarily daunting. I don't think you could pay me enough money to be an elementary school teacher. They teach every subject, and they're also required to build the foundation for the social emotional skills of those students. So we found that if we are there with them, if we get a glove and a ball and get in the game, if we give them support, if we listen to them, one of the things that I used to do with the head of the union is that every year we would go around in the spring, we'd pick a grade level. So 2 years ago it was grade 4. And we met with grade 4 teachers in every single building. What's working? What's not working? What professional development do you need? Where are the problems that exist? The administrative team looks at video of teachers and talks about what's the feedback that you would give that teacher, what's the coaching that you would give that teacher. The coaches for math and literacy also watch videos. We talk, so we come from the same place. If everybody is asking that teacher to do the same kind of thing, if the expectations are clear and are the same, I think that when you get pushback, generally it's because people don't feel supported and they don't feel like they're insecure. They're not able to do what you're asking them to do. I think if you acknowledge that this is scary, that this is hard, tell me what you need and I will provide you with the supports to do this, I think that takes away a lot of that. Will there be people that disagree? Sure, there will be. And then I think you have to make a decision by case-to-case basis about how you're going to handle that.
So with all that, how do you reconcile the length of the school day, which you, I believe, think is too short in Arlington, and having an early release every Tuesday to implement a lot of these strategies?
Right. Because what happens on Tuesday afternoon is critically important to the success of our students. Teachers need that time to learn the new curriculum. Over the last 5 years, we've put in a new science curriculum, K through 5. We roll it out 2 grades at a time. We've implemented and expanded the Lucy Calkins writing program. We're in the process of upgrading our math program from Investigations to Investigations 2. We're in our second phase of doing that, the second grades of doing that, the second 2 grades. Without the professional development, there's just that's not going to happen. And professional development includes, what are your problems? Where are you having problems? What are topics that kids are having problems with? Professional development includes, how do you get kids to be self-regulated in the classroom? How do you get kids to be self-directed? How do you get kids to work in groups? How do you have a respectful environment in your classroom? Looking at student data, I've had teachers who look at writing samples, plan with the literacy coach how they're going to change what's happening in their classroom, deliver that instruction, come back the next month, look at different writing samples. Did we get what we wanted? So while we may have cut back on the instruction time, so kids are getting 1.5 hours less instruction time, but the regulations for elementary school require 900 hours a year, and we were well above that. We were in about like 1,076. So by cutting back that 1.5 hours, I really feel like that the students are getting more quality education than they were getting before. We have looked at our MCAS scores, our PARCC scores from last year, and saw absolutely, with one exception of one school, absolutely no surprises whatsoever, and got the same kind of performance that we got prior to having that early release. So we have to monitor that carefully. We also look at our writing growth, and our writing growth has been phenomenal. So while that wouldn't be reflected in PARCC and MCAS, it's reflected in how we assess our writing programs.
So speaking of the Common Core, what are your thoughts on the Common Core, and what role do you believe the federal government should have on local education?
Well, let me answer the first one. Common Core, if you are familiar with advanced placement classes, AP classes, particularly in literature and in social studies, the kinds of things that we're asking kids to do with Common Core have always been asked for by those courses. Taking information from multiple sources, analyzing and synthesizing that information, using nonfiction text, using primary sources, all of those things that we were asked for in the Common Core that we're expecting students to do as young as grade 3, 4, and 5 are leading them to be successful should they choose to do so in an AP class. The ability to do close reading, the ability to understand nonfiction text, having worked in industry, I had lots of very, very bright people that worked for me, but if you handed them a manual on how to do something, think about the other day when we switched to daylight savings time. How many people still have a clock in their house or in their car that is an hour wrong? And that's because getting out that manual and figuring out how to change that time is very, very daunting for many people. And the kinds of skills that we're having kids do, the kind of nonfiction, being able to analyze and synthesize, those are the kinds of skills that we're starting to really focus on when we look at kids. I talk to my husband and manager's engineers, and we constantly talk about, can your engineers write a memo that explains the change in a process? And a lot of them still can't do that. So we teach kids how to write things that explain, that give evidence, that make arguments, because those are the kinds of skills that they need to do when they go out into the world. Do I think the federal government should have a role? I think in the state of Massachusetts, it's not that important. If we looked at, because when I go to national conferences, everybody says, you're from Massachusetts? Tell us, how do you do this? How do you do that? They look at Massachusetts. Having worked in New Mexico, having had a daughter who lived in South Carolina, knowing the kind of standards that are looking at the TAS, which is the Texas test of basic studies, knowing that that's at the 7th and 8th grade level, and that's what students have to pass in order to graduate from high school. It's hard for me to say that, I would get students in different districts that come from other parts of the country, and I would say that they are not held to the same standards. So while for students in Massachusetts, I don't know that it's that important, I think that there are students that are in other districts across the country for whom that is important.
Thank you, Mr. Hockman. Mrs. Dunn?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Welcome, Dr. Chesson. My question is about communications. How would you characterize your communication style, and could you give us some examples of how you would communicate with the different constituencies, the parents, the staff, the school committee, city officials?
When you think you've communicated enough, you should communicate 2 times what you've already done. There's just no way to over-communicate. I think you need to look at a variety of communication methods. Everything from the monthly newsletter, which I work on with the person who writes it for the superintendent. Oftentimes we put things about curriculum and instruction and assessment into the monthly newsletter, to tweets, to using Twitter, to using social media. I have one of the most interesting things that ever happened in Arlington was we implemented a program on a pilot basis at 3 elementary schools for kindergarten. It was extraordinarily successful. It's called Tools in the Mind. And we then met as a team and talked to teachers and talked to the school committee and decided to expand it to the other 4 schools. And we got into about October, and all of a sudden there was some concerns being raised about the program. And we had to bring in, we had to set up, based on school committee policy, we set up a committee to take a look at that with community representatives, representatives from one of the new 4 schools, representatives from one of the original 3 schools that had it, administrators, teachers. It was a very large committee. The whole time I kept asking myself, we had this for 3 years in 3 schools. We never had an issue. Now we've expanded it to these 7 schools, and parents are, what they were concerned about was there was a book, a series of books that was used as part of this program called the Magic Treehouse books. There were some parents who were concerned that these books might be too scary for their kindergartners. So we brought in people from Tools of the Mind, which is a national program which has data across the country to talk about it. We brought in teachers to talk about it. But I kept asking myself, what is it? What is it? And then one day it dawned on me. Those pilot schools, those teachers were also our teachers who were piloting the use of technology in their classroom. And almost every week, they were making a small iMovie of what was going on in their classroom. And they were posting it either on their website or by Twitter or just emailing it home to parents so that parents could see what was actually going on in their classroom. And they could see that students were growing, and they could see that students were happy, and they could see that students were engaged. And that didn't happen in all those other schools when we expanded it. And it really brought home for me what the power of communication, constant communication, can do. So we did a couple things. We did answer the concerns of parents. We developed some policies and procedures if a student looked like they were nervous about the curriculum, and attended to many things about that. But we also asked the rest of those teachers to start sending home stuff. Making little videos or sending home a tweet or putting it on their website, and within a month and a half, 2 months, we stopped having complaints. It really brought home to me that what we call ubiquitous communication, which is often referred to in technology networks, meaning that it's totally blanketed coverage that happens all the time, that it goes for depth as well as coverage, has to happen. And so I communicate, for example, last Thursday evening, we had something called Reimagining Education. And so we invited parents and community members to come to the town hall. We had 20 teachers who each presented for 10 minutes in a very much like a science fair kind of forum on something different that was happening in their classroom that parents would not recognize as something that they experienced, or community members. They presented for 10 minutes, they answered questions for 5 minutes, and then people could rotate. So people got to see 3 presentations. One of the follow-on activities for that is that we gave people sticky notes. So if there was a question or a comment or a concern that they didn't get to say when they were at that table, they could put it on a sticky note, and then they could put it on the wall. And then I told people that if they followed me on Twitter, they'd get an answer faster than when I put the FAQs on the district website. So I think I have like another 100 followers on Twitter. No one's following me on Twitter to find out what I'm doing, but I retweet everything that happens in all the classrooms. And that's what people want to see, what's happening in our classrooms. So those are some of the things I do for communication.
Thank you.
Thank you. We probably have about another 6 or 7 minutes. I have a question, and then I do want to afford you the opportunity for a little bit of a closing statement at the end, a minute or two. My question is regarding your vision for education. Here in the city of Peabody, we're a level 3 district. I feel we deserve higher, and we have some outstanding people that work for the city. But we are a level 3 district, and certainly all of us want to see that improve. Could you talk about how you think we can improve, and maybe some specifics if you've worked on improving some of the districts that you've been in terms of what their status is? If you could speak to that, please.
When I worked in Boston at the Boston Arts Academy, when I came on board, 78% of the students were failing the MCAS. By the time I left 6 years later, in the high 80s, were passing the MCAS. I wish I could tell you that everything we did was innovative. many of the things that we did were innovative. But some of the things were just common sense. We made sure that our scope and sequence of our curriculum matched the standards. I don't think that you need to teach to the test. As a matter of fact, some of the districts that do best across the state, and some of the schools that do best across the state, are not concerned with teaching to the test. What they're doing is they're concerned with teaching the students the power standards that they need to learn, but they're also teaching students to think critically. Because no matter how often or how long you teach students, there's going to be something on the test that you didn't get to. But when the student can look at the question and gather clues from the question and sort of perhaps, drop one or two answers, now all of a sudden we've increased their likelihood that they're going to be able to answer that question correctly, even if they don't know the exact question, the exact answer to that question. Critical thinking, problem solving, those skills, being able to write effectively, being able to find evidence in any piece of reading to make an argument. Those are what we call transferable skills. And one of the things we've been working on over the last couple years in Arlington is to identify those skills that are called transferable. Those are skills that in science, you come up with evidence, you write your conclusion, you back your conclusion up with evidence. In literacy analysis or literature analysis, you're going to read the reading, you're going to write your opening statement, you're going to come up with evidence to support that conclusion. When you solve a math problem, you may not put as many words, but the teacher will say, what's your answer and how do you know it's the right one? Again, you're going to give an answer, you're going to give evidence, you're going to support your conclusion. And the same thing goes in social studies. Schools that focus on those things, and I'm not saying that doesn't happen in Peabody because I don't intimately know your curriculum, but that would be one of the things I would be looking for. Whether students were learning and getting re-emphasized these transferable skills starting as early as K1, 2, all the way up to grade 12. Another thing, so working on transferable skills was also another thing we did in Boston. How can kids problem solve? How can they answer any writing prompt? Some of it's formulaic in the sense that the old, and actually still, MCAS questions, I have students who could probably recite to you. In literature, as in life, your friends shape your choices. Think about a book that you have read in or outside of class and give evidence of how in that book a friend changed your life. Every year, that's what the MCAS prompt sounds like. If students are able to understand what that kind of question is and be able to answer it in almost every situation, the chances are that they're going to do better on standardized tests. I said in the beginning that I don't know that standardized tests are only one measure for success. I noticed that when I look at the results for Peabody on the MCAS, that primarily the driver for the level 3 comes from high school. That's very interesting to me because usually high school is the area where you can get students over and get your level up to level 2 the easiest. I also did know that there was a problem with the participation rate. That was one of the things that was listed. I would want to investigate what's wrong with the participation rate. I know that one year when I was in Arlington, it said participation rate, and you thought it was in the MCAS, but in fact it wasn't. It was in the access test. So you have to unlayer it. So I would be looking at unlayering that. What is the problem with the participation rate? What is the concern? Is it because of the number of ELL students that are not taking the science test? Because frankly, they don't have the English language skills to take the science test, and the science test is only offered in English. It's not offered in other languages the way the math test is. So what are the problems with the participation rate? It says that the achievement gap is not being closed. What part of the achievement gap is that? Is it English language learner students? Is it special education students? Is it students that are high risk for other reasons? Those would be the data analysis that I wouldn't do alone in a vacuum. I would certainly have teachers because they're in the classrooms every day. They know where the problems are. Talk to teachers, talk to administrators, find out where the challenge is that's keeping that school from becoming a level 2. It's certainly a laudable goal. It's certainly a goal that every district has. We have level 2 and level 1 schools. Would every principal in Arlington want to be a level 1 school? Sure. But you have to sort of do a cost-benefit analysis. Once you get to level 2, you have to decide if what it takes to get level 1 is really where you want to put your money. One of the things that we did in Boston Arts Academy that really made me sad, that pushed kids' scores over the edge, because we had gotten to a point where we couldn't get the scores any higher, is that we offered a Saturday boot camp the week before MCAS. And we said, okay, these are the 10 things that you absolutely need to know what to do when you go into that math test. So before the English language arts test, the Saturday before, and we gave them breakfast and we gave them pizza, everything we could possibly entice them to come on a Saturday, because not every high school student wants to come on a Saturday. But we got the vast majority of kids to come in. They were there for the morning, and it was like, these are the things that you need to write down, because when you get the formula sheet for that MCAS for math, it does not have the formula for slope on it. So we would tell kids, the first thing you want to do when you walk in is write down the formula for slope on your math, because you can use the math sheet every day when you take the math test. It's your sheet. Write down the formula for slope, because you're going to get into the middle of the test and you're going to panic. Write down mean, mode, and median. What do those mean to you? In definitions that those mean to you, because those are things that kids are constantly confusing. So you try to help them come up with a definition for themselves, or a way to tell the difference between those things for themselves. When you get that math sheet, write it down. And we went up the last 10 points that we were looking to go up. That disappoints me, because that's really not what education is about. But part of it is trying to get better on standardized tests. And it will help students also get better on the SATs and on the AP exams if they choose to take it. So those are some of the steps that I would take a look at. Look at the scope and sequence. Look at how the prep work is done. Concentrate that prep work right before the kids are going to take the test with those 10 things that if they can remember, and if they can write it down when they get in, so when they get to problem 37 and they've been testing for an hour and a half and they're fried, they can look down and say, oh, mean, I know what that means to me. Or mode, oh, the one that comes the most. I remember that because she kept saying MO most, MO mode. Those are all kinds of little mnemonic devices that you can work with kids on. But starting with the teachers and talking to them would be the first place to start.
Well, thank you. I think all of us have greatly enjoyed this interview. I want to give you, as I said, the opportunity, maybe in a minute or two, to have a closing statement.
We've talked off and on about the fact that I came in from industry. And that certainly helps me with things like budgets and maybe organization, because I learned at a great company that's been extraordinarily successful. But what I think is more important about working at IBM is that 35 years ago, that company was saying, you need to do things with teams. You need to build collaboration. You need to expand the individual. You always need to look at your individuals that work in the company and that work in the organization and say, how can I grow this person? And that you have to be committed to that. And I brought that into education with me. So when we started talking about growth mindset for teachers as well as students, it resonated for me. I had worked with that for 10 years. When we started talking about evaluation as not being a pejorative, but a growth-oriented process, supervision and evaluation is about helping each teacher to become better, to say every day, how did I do today and how am I going to do better tomorrow? And giving them the supports to do that. I came into education with that background and with that belief. Working in teams and knowing that it's only with teams of all levels and communication of all levels. I think it also goes back to that. When I worked in industry, I not only communicated with my staff, but 3 levels above me would invite me to come in once a year and talk to them. My boss's boss would have skip levels and would invite me to come in once a quarter. Having all different levels of communication and recognizing that every voice was important, recognizing teamwork, recognizing the importance of the individual were things that I brought into education with me. And so when those things became implemented in education, I was ready to utilize those things. As a matter of fact, I was probably utilizing them already. And I think that that has shaped me as an administrator and as a leader. And the last thing I would leave you with is we talked about my unusual journey. So I worked in a Title I school where I found out 2 days before school started that I was not only going to be teaching math, but I was going to be teaching English language arts and science. Never taught them, never prepped for teaching them, but 2 days before I got there, they said, this is what you have to do. So I taught them. I've been a teacher in urban, suburban, and rural areas. I've been an administrator in small cities like Leominster, in big cities like Boston, in small communities like Maynard, and I feel like that has given me the depth and breadth of the background that I stole from all those good teachers that I told you about, that would prepare me to be able to contribute to your community, and I would be honored to be asked to do so. Thank you.
Dr. Jessen, wonderful to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
Don't wait. Communicate. Make your emergency plan today.
Well, good evening again, everyone. Our next candidate to be interviewed is Deborah Ruggiero. Mrs. Ruggiero, it's nice to have you here today with us. As I mentioned, I'm going to say a few words, and then I'm going to allow you the opportunity to make a couple of minutes statement, an opening statement as to what brought you to apply and your interest in the city of Peabody. And then we have a number of questions that we'll be asking you. Each member is going to be asking you a set of questions. And we'll go probably about an hour, maybe slightly over that, but we're trying to keep to a pretty set schedule. But again, it's wonderful to have you here. Your resume, your recommendations were top notch, and we wanted the opportunity to meet you. So why don't we go right to it? Why don't I give you the opportunity and maybe introduce yourself a bit and talk a little bit about what brought you here. That's the green button.
Green,
yep.
There we go. As you can see, I'm not usually in front of a mic. Good evening, and thank you to the Peabody School Committee, as well as the Massachusetts Association for School Committees for giving me this opportunity to interview with you tonight for your superintendent position. I'd also like to thank the audience for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. It certainly speaks to your vested interest in who's going to lead your school system going forward. My name is Deborah Ruggiero. I'm a 24-year resident of Peabody with 32 years of experience in the public education field. I am humbled and honored that you have chosen me as a viable candidate for your superintendent or possible superintendent position. As you can see with my resume, I come with a wide variety of experience. I was a regular ed teacher a special education teacher, curriculum and instruction teacher, and a principal. I have always been a proactive, collaborative, data-driven, reflective educator. Through these practices, I've been able to work with teachers, parents, district, state, in helping a school move from being a level 4 school to a level 1 school. This was not an easy feat, and it certainly, I do not take full credit for it. I never forget being a teacher, and it really comes from being a team who work together for a common goal, and we all work together diligently to improve our instructional practices, to have open communication, to have a culture that we could make mistakes and be reflective about those mistakes, and monitor what we were doing for the benefit of the students. It always was about the students and improving their performance. MCAS testing, although important, it's one moment in time. And so my teachers regularly were told by me that we need to be growth-minded, and we need to look at where are our students when we get them, and where are we bringing them by the end of the school year. That MCAS testing, although important and accountability is important, it is just one moment in time for these students. I have a saying, a statement that hangs in every area of my school, and I have used this statement all throughout my educational career, that what we say, what we do, and how we respond matters, and it's our choice. Every stakeholder, the student, the teacher, the school committee, the parents, the district administrators, everyone, if they just think about the words that we say, the actions that we take, and how we respond, and that we determine why does it matter, it could definitely change the outcome, the final outcome of what we're setting out to do. And so that's what I live by, it's what I ask my teachers to live by, and it's what I ask my students to live by. I hope that you see in the answers to your questions, my answers to your questions, that you will see that I am a dedicated educator, that I am a collaborative worker, and that hopefully I'm the right fit for the Peabody school system.
Thank you, and again, it's great having you here. I'm going to ask the first question, and right now we're getting into our budget discussions, and really it's all year round, the budget is a strong part of our work that we do here for the school committee and for our school district. But right now we're really getting into some of the tough issues and tough questions and challenges. Can you talk a little bit about experience that you've had working with budgets and some of the, what your mindset is going into budget discussions and evaluations?
So my experience thus far has really been at the school level. As a principal, I am in charge of my school's budget. But as a level 4 school, we had to submit a grant application, a redesigned grant application, and were awarded a $1.3 million grant. I was in charge of overseeing that grant. For me, it's all about sustainability. Decisions that we made along the way were always made based on data to determine, is this something we really need? It was always based on, can we sustain it for years forward? I've watched a couple of times in my career, one specifically that this current school, Harrington School that I'm at, this is the second time that Harrington School has been a level 4 school or an underperforming school. The first time I was a teacher there, and I was part of a team of teachers that helped to redesign what we were doing. And we did get removed from underperforming status back then. That was in 2002. But the decisions that were made were not sustainable. So that was an issue. Because over time, with new leadership that came in, they couldn't sustain the decisions that were made, and they had changed some of the procedures and systems that we had put in place. And as a result, the school ended up level 4 again. This time around, we really focused in on the whole child, not just the academic side of the child. We learned from the first time that we could be the best educators in the world, but if we don't address some of the social emotional needs, brain research shows that the child just can't retain it, that it's a block for them. So when we're looking at the budget and decisions that we want to do and interventions we want to put in place, or initiatives that we want to begin, professional development that we wanted to do, it was always surrounded by how are we serving the whole child, is it sustainable, and is it supported with data?
Thank you. I know the committee has a number of questions, and why don't we go right to it. Mr. Rossignol, why don't you start us off?
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
My first question on a national level is there's new talk and new implementation of Every Student Success Act versus No Child Left Behind. Can you just elaborate on what you know about the new process of Every Student Success Act?
So Every Student Succeeds Act is all about that we are teaching to the individual abilities of kids. That we're not teaching that every child learns the same. That we're willing to look at innovative ways to teach all students. Students within a classroom, you could need to do 3 different ways to teach the same lesson, depending on what kind of learner that student is. It's about providing programs, and actually, I happen to know that Peabody Public Schools has their Peabody Learning Academy. That's a good example of being innovative and teaching kids for how they need to be taught. So that new thinking really isn't new. It's something we should have all been doing all along. I think we get hung up on the standardized testing and teaching to the test. It's not about the test. It's about teaching skills and strategies that they could use no matter what's in front of them. And that's how I've run my school. That's the message I send to my teachers all the time when they're panicking about MCAS testing. I'm always saying to them, put that test aside. We are not teaching to that test. We're teaching focused skills and strategies that our students should be able to do no matter what they're looking at and reading.
Now on that's differentiated instruction. Now that costs money. What is your background regarding grants and grant writing? And I know you touched on one specific grant. Mm-hmm. Do you have any other grant experience besides the one that you implemented?
I have not personally written other grants other than the redesign grant, which was a pretty big grant. We had to do a renewal application every year for the 4 years that we had the grant. I am very familiar with Title I. I was a magnet facilitator years ago, early in my career at my school, and was in charge of that Title I budget. Of course, that was at the school level, not the district level. It was my first experience actually with budgets. I do know that there are lots of grants out there. Differentiation, you shouldn't necessarily need a grant for that. It's really about professional development and teaching our teachers and working with our teachers on how to differentiate their lessons so that in that planning stage, when they are in their planning stage, that they're thinking about the what ifs. What if this group of students didn't understand my instruction and didn't master that skill or be able to show independently that they could do it? What am I going to do? Do I have something in the sidelines ready for them to get them to the next level? That doesn't take a grant to have to do. It's about professional development.
And I know you touched on PARC MCAS, that it's a snapshot and it's one standard of measure. what other specific standards of measure would you use to show the growth that you were talking about?
So at my school, we do baseline data in the fall every year. It's typically DIBELS for reading. A comprehension benchmark that is in Lynn is not a requirement, but at my school we do require it, and a math assessment. And so that gives us baseline of where are the students when we get them in the fall. And any new students that come in throughout the year, we do baseline data as soon as they come. Throughout the year, with every lesson taught, there are formative assessments that are done, and those formative assessments are all about tapping into how does that drive my instruction? What am I going to do for that group? All right, this group understands my instruction, so I'm going to challenge them and give them an independent application problem or text to work on, while I work with this group on trying to fix any misconceptions that they have in the learning. So formative assessment along the way, and then end of unit assessments. At the district level, there is a need for some district common assessments that you can then analyze at the school and district level to determine any holes or any supports that are needed for specific schools.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosignol. Mr. Miko?
Thank you for being here, and congratulations on your success from going from a level 4 to a level 1 school. That's very difficult to do. We're in a similar situation where we're a level 3 district, so I just wanted to ask you about your instructional methods, and I know you spoke a little bit about it, but if you could just think of some of the theories or some of the true instructional methods out there that you would implement in Peabody if you were our next superintendent. Thank you.
So the biggest bang for my buck was actually driving into the planning stage, because for any teacher, that planning part is the core of what you're doing. So we always start, we did a book talk with Understanding by Design. It's the backwards planning model, where you start with the standard first, because the standards really are our curriculum. That is what we're teaching. And the curriculum materials are more your primary resources or supplementary resources that you would use to teach that standard. So we did a book talk for Understanding Design so that teachers had a stronger foundation in that planning stage. So that what I used to say to my teachers is, we can't ever come in winging it. You have to be prepared, you have to know what you're setting out to do, and you have to know the what ifs, so that you're ready and you're not standing there with a group of students who maybe didn't understand that first tier 1 instruction, and now you're standing there, well, what am I going to do with them? You should already have a plan for the what ifs. And that formative assessing along the way, we did a book talk on formative assessment so that teachers had a good, strong understanding of how do you assess, what does that look like, tickets to leave at the end of your lesson, quick checking for understanding during the lesson, that all of that happens on a daily basis, not just when you're being evaluated.
Thank you, Mr. Miko. Mr. Olympio?
Thank you for being here. Could you speak to your special education experience, and also to how you would manage a special education budget, and also considerations as far as keeping children in district versus out of district?
So special education, of course, is a big piece of any district's budget. But there are laws that are attached to all of the special ed pieces that we do need to follow. I feel like, for me, my experience in special education, I was a teacher for a number of years. I worked in a behavior resource classroom for third grade to sixth grade. I was a resource teacher for a couple of years, so I have worked with children with special needs a lot of my career. For me, it's about inclusion, it's about prevention, that if first of all, we should never be pulling out kids from the classroom. They're missing something. As soon as you pull them out, they're missing what's going on in the classroom. So at my school, all of my children who are on IEPs, individualized education plans, are in the classroom. The resource teacher goes into the classroom and services them in the classroom. There is collaboration time that I have at my school that my teachers, the classroom teachers, and the support staff work together during that collaboration time. Classroom teachers across grade level so that there's consistency within the grade level on what they're teaching and how they're teaching it, but also for support staff to be able to know exactly what the classroom teacher will be teaching, and then they modify it for their students in the classroom. The prevention side of it is that it would not be uncommon at my school for a resource teacher who's in a classroom to pull in a student who might be struggling in whatever they're working on, and that teacher would pull them in to their group and work with them. So we're actually preventing possible IEPs. In terms of outside placement, I would say I would want to look at what are the disabilities that are in play for those outside placements, and are there ways that as a district we could do that in-house. I know that like in Lynn Public Schools, that was an issue in Lynn Public Schools for years, and we now have what they refer to as the COACH program, which is for significantly health disabled children. And we have an autistic program that is there's like different levels to it. There is integrated, that autistic children that are a higher level are integrated into the general ed population with support. So there's a general ed teacher, a special education teacher, and maybe a para who's working with that child. And certainly professional development is really important, that our regular ed, our general ed teachers need to have an understanding of how they can support these special needs children and differentiate their instruction when the resource teacher is not there. So there's kind of a lot of moving parts to it, but it certainly could be done.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Mrs. Carpenter?
Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Ruggiero. I appreciate your time here. My question to you regards collective bargaining, and I'd like to ask you about your experience with it, and if you don't have experience with it at the level that you're at right now, how you envision the collective bargaining process in regards to working with the union, with the teachers, administrators, the students, how you see that progressing and how you would work that when we're in collective bargaining.
So I've never been at a bargaining table per se. I was a union member at one point, so I do understand the process. As a level 4 school, we had a different union agreement than the rest of the bargaining unit, and so I was involved with that. I also have always had a very good relationship with the union president in Lynn, so much so that he had asked that I be part of a team that helped Salem with the Bowditch School was going through a difficult time, and they wanted to do their own monitoring site visit, and I was asked to be part of that through the Salem Teachers Union and the AFT. So I think what's most important with the union and the district and the superintendent with the union, there has to be a common goal of what's right for kids. And you have to work together as a team. If you don't, you're just spinning your wheels and you're not going to get anywhere. So there needs to be give and take in that, and compromise, and listening. And there really has to be data that supports any decision. I mean, I really feel strongly about that. When we're making decisions about anything, we need to be able to back it up with why is this important, and what data supports that it's important.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Carpenter. Mr. Hockman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Ruggiero. I appreciate that you've submitted your application and your resume to us for review, and I'm happy to conduct this interview publicly with you. So the glaring question I have in terms of the documents that you submitted is, you've worked 31 years exclusively in Lynn, and you appear to be cherished and appreciated in Lynn based upon the letters of reference from your colleagues and the fact that you have a contract as a principal through 2020. So why Peabody and why superintendent? Why do you want to be a superintendent now?
Well, I'm not going to lie, I love the city of Lynn. I grew up in Lynn. I'm a product of the Lynn Public Schools. My husband and I both grew up in Lynn. But we moved to Peabody 24 years ago. We volunteered, my husband and I, when our kids were younger. My kids are now older, they're young adults now. My youngest is a junior in college. But when they were younger, my husband and I were very involved in volunteering in youth sports in Peabody. We were on the board of Peabody Little League for many years. We were trying to figure out how many years. It was a lot. I was a woman in a man's world, and it took me some time to earn their trust that I knew what I was talking about. But I did. I ended up being the major league coordinator, and ran the drafts. So I earned some respect there. I feel like I know that we've vested our life in Peabody. 24 years is a long time. We do not plan to move. We're very happy where we are. All three of my children have expressed that they want to stay in this area, which I'm thrilled about. And someday, my children will have grandchildren, and my hope is that my grandchildren will benefit from a great school system in Peabody. So why? I'm not leaving because I'm unhappy in Lynn. I've had a great career there, but I am ready for the next step. And there's just not an opportunity right now in Lynn for that. And when Peabody's position came up and I saw it, I decided to take the leap. It's a big leap, and I realize that, elementary principal to superintendent is a big jump. However, 32 years of experience and moving a school with a team of teachers that really worked hard for that, I think I'm ready for the jump.
And with the dates on the letters of reference that you have, I suspect that this is the only superintendent job that you've applied for.
It is. I have not. I've looked, believe me, I have looked. But I am a firm believer that if you are going to interview for a position, that you need to be vested in that position. I'm very, I pick the jobs wisely. I had interviewed for Wakefield's assistant superintendent 2 years ago. Not superintendent, sorry, assistant superintendent. Was a finalist for that, and I was very proud of that. But it wasn't the right fit, and I'm okay with that. But I just don't feel that putting your name in a multitude of places sends the right message to the people that you're interviewing for. And I wanted you all to know that I'm vested in Peabody.
So you're in the unique position of the 6 finalists that we're interviewing publicly to be a resident of Peabody. What is it that you envision your role if we were to offer you the position of superintendent? How do you envision your role in our community?
So I will tell you, I'm an authentic person. I consider myself an authentic person. I don't put on a show. I am who I am. And for me, a superintendent needs to be a presence in the district, needs to visit schools, be at events, be part of the community, work together with the school committee. It needs to be a team. I think that philosophy for me comes from my own growing up of playing sports myself, watching my husband. We've been together since high school, so watching him play in high school and college, watching my own children play. Bill Belichick, he knows what he's doing, right? do your job, right? If everybody does their job and there is no, it's not my job, what a great world this would be if we all had that philosophy. So for me, it's about being part of the community, being present in the community, being accessible to parents, school committee members, students. One of the things that I'm very proud of with my school is I'm not afraid to hear what's not working. I've done surveys, I've done focus groups on my own, not me doing them, but I'll have teachers who will take groups of students and ask questions because I want to know what's working for them and what's not working for them. You can't fix something if you don't know what's not working. And I learned that lesson through the monitoring site visits. We had to go through this excruciating process of classroom visits and data collection and focus groups. Every year we had to go through that, through the level 4 process. And the first time I went through it, I was a little offended. Well, I won't lie. When the team from the state shared what wasn't working, what they felt wasn't working, my claws came out a little bit and I was offended. And I said to them, I'm not going to say anything, but I feel like my teachers are working hard, we're working hard. For you to say that is really getting under my skin. And I said, but I'm going to take a step back, I'm going to sleep on it. And the next morning I woke up and I said to my staff, you know what? We needed to hear that. When you're in it day in and day out, you lose sight of sometimes what you're actually doing. It's kind of like when you're trying to lose weight and you go on a diet and you're in it day in and day out and you don't see the improvement, and then all of a sudden someone you haven't seen sees you and goes, wow, you look great, what are you doing? That's exactly what this was. It was a fresh set of eyes that came into our school and saw what we were doing and acknowledged the good things, but also acknowledged, oh, here's something you want to look at. You might want to reflect on this. And that was powerful for us. And so we continued that process and still do. I'm always looking for feedback from my staff and my students and my parents on what do you feel is working well and what do we need to look at to change.
We have some older elementary schools here in Peabody and a high school that was partially refurbished and continues to receive some attention. What experience do you have, if any, with the MSBA or writing statements of interest?
So I'm lucky enough that my building isn't in too bad a shape, although we did have many times it rained inside the school. My building, we just got a new roof. I understand the high school is getting a new roof this summer. So we just finished that process. I sat at the meetings that they would have regularly each week to talk about, the progress of the project and what the next steps were. I wasn't afraid to email the group and say, hey, opening day is coming up and we need this XYZ done. So I've never built a new school, but I lived with a husband who did. My husband works in the Wilmington Public Schools, and they just built a high school, and so he was on that building committee, so I've heard it through him, but have not personally experienced it. I know it's a lengthy process, but I've seen what Higgins looks like. I have not had the pleasure of seeing the inside yet, but the outside, if the outside is any indication of what the inside is, I'm sure it's a fabulous school. And I would hope that the high school is next in the pipeline.
Ms. Dunn gives tours of the Higgins Middle School Saturday mornings at 9 a.m.
Oh, do you? Is that true?
No, I'm joking, I'm sorry. If I may. Presently, Ms. Carpenter is chairing a committee studying start times in schools, and we presently have a high school that starts at 7:25 and elementary schools that start at 8:55. Just wonder if you have any thoughts on appropriate start times and what your thoughts are on the subject.
Well, my school starts at 7:45 and ends at 1:45. The challenge with that for me is if we wanted to do any before-school extra help, they're coming at like 7:15, 7 o'clock in order to even get 45 minutes in. We do it, though. We do. We have students that come in the morning. I've always questioned why the elementary schools start as late as they do. I believe I have to imagine that it's because of the transportation and, trying to sort out, you got to get the high school and middle school kids in first, and then those same buses would then pick up the elementary students. So logically, I understand that. I would want to know, is anything done? I know there's before school groups that happen, and in the schools I've seen those numbers, but I'm curious what happens with those students. Is that time utilized for maybe interventions, math intervention or ELA interventions where kids could come before school and get some extra support? I mean, 9 o'clock is hard. I think you're losing, kids are at their best during the morning. I'm not going to say that I would change it, but I would want to hear from a variety of places what are the pros and cons of changing it, and what are the pros and cons of leaving it as it is. And if it stays as it is, how are we utilizing that time to its fullest capacity?
Thank you, Mr. Hockman. Mrs. Dunn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming tonight. My question is about communications. How would you categorize your style of communication? And as a leader, how would you use your talent to communicate with all the different constituencies that you would have, the staff, the parents, elected officials?
So I consider myself a good communicator. I like to talk. Well, I don't really like to talk. I like to talk with people. I like the face-to-face. But I also like the updating for people. Like I do a newsletter every month for my parents that kind of fills them in on what's going on at the school. I do a calendar every month that shows, tells them what's happening for that month. My teachers, there's a Monday memo that is sent out every week to kind of give them a picture of what's the week going to look like and what are some of their responsibilities during that week. We have we call it professional learning time, once a week with staff. That's 40 minutes, and that's more to keep them up to date on instructional practices and fine-tuning what we're doing at the school level. So at the district level, I would want to have, I would imagine that I would want to have like leadership teams where we would meet regularly or at least monthly to go over what's happening at the school level. I wouldn't want to lose touch of the school level. For parents, I would love to see almost like an open forum, like a coffee time that parents could come and ask questions, more of a social kind of thing that, so that I'm seen as approachable. For school committee, certainly, we've got the superintendent needs to work with the school committee. You have to work as a team for the benefit of the city as a whole. And so, I've always been the type that anything that has happened at my school that I feel is something that is of concern or needs to be informed, the superintendent is always called and just informed, even if I think that there's a question about it. So I would think that as a leader of a district, I would want to be the same way, that parents would be informed when they need to be informed, school committee would be informed of anything that's happening in the district. Safety is integral for me. Parents are giving us their kids for a big chunk of the day, for 180 days. And so we are responsible for their safety. And because of that, I think parents deserve the right to know if something's going on. Obviously, within reason. You don't want to alarm them either. but they have a right to know. It's their children. So I am an open communicator, an open door policy. My office door is never closed unless I'm having a parent conference that no one should, that needs to be confidential. But for my staff, they have access to me at all times, as well as parents. Parent could walk into my building at any time, and so long as I'm not currently in a meeting, if I'm available, I meet with them. I do not send them away.
Great, thank you, Mrs. Dunn. We have probably about 10 minutes or so, and I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask. And at the end, I wanted to give you the opportunity to maybe summarize with a closing statement for about a minute or two. I want to give you that opportunity, but this has been wonderful to hear your answers to these questions. My question is about your vision for the city of Peabody and education here in the city. As you know, we're a level 3 community, even though I believe that we do a much better job than that level gives us credit for. We have great teachers and great administrators, and but we are a level 3, and certainly all of us here want to improve upon that. Now, you've had the success going from level 4 to level 1, which is outstanding. Can you talk a little bit about what your vision would be for the city of Peabody, our educational system, a little bit about what specifically was done to make those improvements that you made at your school, and maybe how you can implement that for the city of Peabody?
So my vision would first be to collect all the information, to meet with the administrators from each building, to meet with teachers, to hear from the people who are on the front lines, the people who are doing this work, because I agree with you 100% that just because it's a level 3 district does not mean good work isn't happening. Harrington was a level 4 school. We were doing a great job at our school, but it wasn't translating into the test. And so the first step for me would be collecting all the information, having focus groups of teachers and parents and community members, school committee, and hearing from each stakeholders group, what do you see are the good things that are working, and what do you think the challenges are, and how are those challenges currently being worked on? How do we support them? In looking at the Peabody District report card, your CPIs are really high. I'm coming from a school that was in the low 60s in a CPI. We are now in the high 70s, low 80s. So we're still not where you are. However, the ELL students, we're all seeing an influx of diversity in our districts. And I know Peabody's no different. We are a very diverse community, and I love that. But how are we supporting those students? The students who still maybe can orally speak English, but maybe are not academically, their academic language isn't there yet. For ELLs, there is a process that happens. They first have to acquire the listening and the speaking, which are the easiest skills for them to learn. It's their ability to listen to someone speak English and understand what they're saying, but also their ability to speak English. The speaking comes quicker. That's the first thing that comes. But a lot of times teachers, when students, they come to them not speaking English and now they're speaking English, they think, oh, good, we did our job. No, we only did half the job. Now you have to work on the academic language and helping these students understand the concepts and then translate it into their work. That's harder for them and takes longer. So I would want to hear from the district level or the school level, how are we supporting those students? I would, the children who are disabled, what is the inclusion model? Is it pull out or is it push in? Are we supporting them adequately enough? What is the process in the district for identifying kids who have disabilities? Is there a pre-process? In Lynn, we have a student study team. It's a general education process. For teachers, it's a resource for teachers to go talk to other teachers when they're having difficulties with students in their learning or in their social emotional well-being. And these teachers who are on this team provide interventions that they can try, and then they try them. If they worked, great, we've solved that problem. If they didn't work, they can come back to the student study team and they rethink it, maybe come up with some other ideas, or they determine that we need further testing. The parent is always part of this process. At my school, we invite the parent in when we're concerned. And so I would want to know, what is that? Is there a process like that in Peabody? And if so, what does it look like? In terms of, I would want to talk to the high school, because I know your high school is the level 3 school. And then you have one level 1 school, and then the rest are level 2s. Growth is huge in those numbers. If we're not helping kids grow in their learning, that hurts you in the data world of MCAS. It's one of the things that for my school is what has helped us move from level 4 to level 1, because we have had huge growth in our students. Even if they're not performing, they might not have been proficient in MCAS, but they had a huge growth percentile. That helps. So it's shifting the mindset from performance to growth. And even your highest performing kids need to grow. They need to show that they're moving further, that we're challenging them. So it's not just about the students who are in warning or needs improvement. It's also about those proficient kids, moving them to advanced and having kids constantly moving. So as an educator, for my teachers, I'm constantly talking to them about, are you moving your kids? How are we moving them? When they see red in Dibbles, I always ask them, okay, let's not focus on the color. Let's look at the score. Did you move that student? Did the student make adequate progress? Did they make adequate growth there? And if they moved, then I'm good. I'm happy about that. And we just keep plugging away at it. So it's really about rethinking how we're working with our students and the structures that are in place.
Thank you. One other question I have. I can imagine having your 31, 32 years in Lynn, that you've experienced some challenging moments, had some moments of crisis. How have you handled those? And can you maybe give us a specific instance of a very challenging, difficult situation that you were able to get a handle on and improve?
I actually am currently in one. I have a little kindergartner, 5-year-old, who came from Bangladesh. And mom and dad don't speak English, they speak Bengali. The child speaks a little bit of English, but mostly Bengali. The child came to us in October, came into the classroom without mom initially, but would cry, like most kindergartners do, that adjustment period, and it's not uncommon for that to happen, and we help support them with that. But this little girl, the anxieties she was feeling progressed. They intensified over time, to the point where she was bolting out of the room, making herself sick, taking off out of the line in the, at arrival to go catch mom as mom was walking away. And we had to be innovative on how were we going to keep this child in school while we were trying to figure out what was going on. So I allowed mom to sit in the room, in the back of the room, so that we could at least get the child in the room. And now it's March. Mom still is coming to school with this child, which is not sustainable. That's not realistic. We have moved mom out into the hallway in a chair, but the child has to see mom. So this child has an anxiety. She has a legitimate anxiety. We were going to have her evaluated, and then my staff and I sat down. It was the school adjustment counselor, the school social worker, myself, my program specialist, which is like a vice principal, sat down because it was gnawing at us. How were we going to help this child? And so I requested an interpreter. We had a meeting with mom and dad to explain to them what we wanted to do. And so now we're a week, 2 weeks into this, that the child comes to the back door. Mom and the child come in. We happen to have an open room right now, which is not the norm, but the child goes into that room. We separate the child from mom. Mom comes to the front of the school and waits by the main office. And our goal is to increase the amount of time that the child can separate from mom. So right now we're up to 20 minutes without crying, which is good. That's a huge success for this little girl. And then mom gets to sit in her chair outside in the hallway. Our goal is to eventually get her to be separate from mom for longer periods of time and get into the classroom without mom being there. But time will tell. With any work like this, it takes a long time to help a child change their behavior. We had to build trust with this child. But that's a good example of the innovative thinking of that not every child is ADHD, not every child has a disability. And believe me, as a principal, it's hard because I've had to spend a lot of time, and my staff has had to spend a lot of time with this child. So my evaluations, write-ups, get done at night, not during the school day, because the child has to come first. Those are I think a lot of schools are struggling with mental health concerns that are coming into play, trauma that children are experiencing now in life, especially with immigrants coming over. There's trauma that they've dealt with. And we also have to think about the teachers and the secondary trauma and their self-care. We hear lots, as educators, we hear lots of stories, sad stories a lot of times, and that's considered secondary trauma. They care about these kids. And so when you hear a sad story about a child that you've had in your classroom that, maybe all of a sudden became homeless, the teacher feels that. And how are we helping our teachers support themselves and each other in that, and understanding self-care, and how do you help yourself sort through that? Crisis is going to happen, and good administrators think on their feet, and they think outside the box, and they're willing to do whatever needs to get done to get the job done. And I feel like that's what I've done since I've been a principal. I mean, I've had when I first became a principal, I had a crisis of a student who, and it was in the newspaper, a student who had allegedly had been pushed down a set of stairs. And luckily I had all my documentation of any bullying reports that were submitted or brought to the table, our investigation. I had all my interviews of when the student was injured, because legitimately the student had an injury, but it didn't happen at school. And I had to prove that. I sat in front of lawyers. That was not easy. It took us a good about 7 years. I think this year it was just in the paper this year that we won the case. So that was a very challenging situation, and it was a crisis situation at that time when that happened. I had the news in front of my building wanting to interview me. That was a hard thing to go through.
Ms. Ruggiero, thank you. I think all of us have greatly enjoyed this discussion, the opportunity to meet you. I did want to have, as I said, afford you the opportunity to maybe summarize and give a closing statement, and I wanted to give you that time now.
Well, I thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I truly am humbled and honored that you see me as a viable candidate. I come from humble beginnings myself. I am a child from poverty, single mom, dad who walked out when I was 5, never to be seen again. So I was one of those children who had baggage on her shoulders in school. I was that quiet, withdrawn child in the back of the room who was distracted by what was I going to go home to. My mom was a very strong woman who worked hard and drilled in us that education is number one, and that we work hard, and that you have good work ethic, and that you never have the philosophy that it's not your job, that if something needs to be picked up, you pick it up. Would not be uncommon for you to be at my school on a snowy day and see me shoveling. Not because my custodians aren't shoveling, because they usually are, but I'm willing to get out there and do it too. That comes from my upbringing of who I am at the core. I am an authentic person. What you see is what you get. And I work well with people. I actually encourage the collaboration. I work at my best when I'm working with others. No one should ever come into a new position to change everything. So it certainly would not be my goal, if I'm lucky enough to be chosen, to come in to just change everything. It's important that we figure out what's working and what needs to be looked at, and that we include the teachers, the school committee, the principals, the parents, the students in the decision-making process. Now, I do understand that decisions do have to be made, and ultimately tough decisions have to be made. But I have done that in the past, and I'm not afraid to do it now. I hope that my answers, that you have seen my dedication to public school, my work ethic, my willingness to collaborate, and my ability to communicate. And I hope that you consider me for the next step.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great having you here.
Thank you very much.